The game Otherworld was released 10 years ago as a dating simulator, aimed at a female audience. But the number of men was higher. The game allowed players to play different characters, from simple and effective to complex and ineffective. Among them was one useless character, popular for his difficulty level and horrible facial features. And there was a pervert who played this character for 10 years. His name was Baek Yu-sol. One day, a message appeared on the game's forum and Baek used all thought. A new update was coming. The final boss in a dating simulator surprised the guy. It doesn't make sense to a monster that erases magic. And many players lost their characters. A dark demonic dragon appeared in the 13th month of the Black Night. In the game, there was a cult organization called Dark Demon People. Their goal is to help the second world called Personality Gate to take over this world. And when they finally succeeded in achieving this goal, a dark demonic dragon appeared. 90% of the continent is captured by the forces of the Baek cult. Yusuf was not interested in the plot, only in battles, so it was worth trying to destroy this monster. Baek Yu-sol decided to demonstrate the skills that he had honed over the past 10 years. Baek Yu-sol is the only character in the game who cannot use magic. Even though everyone can use magic in the game, even experienced players prefer not to play with it than a regular player. Of course he can use magic, but only one is called Shimmer. The flicker spell allows you to randomly move quickly. From 3 to 10 meters, the direction in which it will flicker is random. So if you do not control the distance well, it will end your life due to the speed of the impact. However, the recharge time and mana consumption are very low, and there is even a penalty if you do not move for 2 seconds. After using the skill, the player has reached the level of master of the flicker spell. He can now control which direction he moves and the distance, and the penalty has also been cancelled. Unlike other spells, flicker was nothing more than a way to move, but Baek Yu-sol became obsessed with this character. For the past 5 years, he has been playing only one character in a game that cannot use magic, and it all depends on the player's skill level. Having easily defeated the dragon, Baek Yu-sol was even surprised that he beat it with a useless character, and decided to share this with other players on the forum. The guy had no sooner entered the forum than the screen with a red light informed him that the wrong ending had been reached, and that 90% of the world had been destroyed. The screen asked Baek Yu-sol to reach the correct ending, but the guy disappeared, leaving his workplace empty. He woke up in a cold hut not knowing where he was, and all he could do was look around. Looking around the ruined house, he noticed an old broken mirror. Looking in the mirror, he realized he had become his game character. His amazement was interrupted by a screen that informed him that he needed to escape from his pursuers. Realizing that this task was in Baek Yu-sol's prologue, he reached into his pocket and found the entrance certificate of the Stella Academy. It was hard to believe, but it was the game's world and the player had to become Baek Yu-sol. That voice said, "You need to reach the true ending." Even though there are only a few endings in the game, and why no one has reached the true ending in 10 years. But this is not the time to think about it, because as far as the player remembered, right after Baek Yu-sol wakes up, the pursuers will break into the house. There was already a group of people outside, who were supposed to pursue the hero. When the main pursuer noticed the cabin, he shouted and ordered to search it. Baek Yu-sol wondered what to do next, since he could neither run away nor defeat them. The screen told him that he could use a flicker. With his body suffering from mana leakage syndrome and unable to hold it in, he has only one hope, the spell he has practiced all his life. The pursuers were already very close, so there was no time to think about it and no need to use flicker. Baek Yu-sol ran out of the hut and came into sight of his pursuers. They were equipped with magic boots, so the only way to escape was to use the shimmer. The main drawback of flicker is that, if you do not control the distance, you can collide with an object and end your life. The pursuer swung his sword at Baek Yu-sol, but he had already managed to use flicker and move away from the blow. The mercenaries were surprised to learn that their opponent was a mage. Still, the leader reassured them that the flicker user would become paralyzed. For 2 seconds, however, Baek Yu-sol was not paralyzed and continued to flee from the pursuit. He should use uneven terrain, because players who do not learn to jerk at this stage will not advance to the next episode. In fact, 99 of the Baek Yu-sol players failed to pass the training, and those who did could not control distance and continuity. He successfully jumped over to the other side of the ditch and ran as fast as he could. The pursuers realize that the flicker user is difficult to catch, so they destroy him with magic from a distance. The second part of the training is to learn how to dodge magic arrows, using flickering, with the help of the skills of the sixth sense. Magic leakage syndrome and cognitive acceleration time seemed to slow down around Baek-Yu-Sol, so he could use the flicker in time and dodge the magic arrows. Looking back, he saw the crater from the magic blow and ran on, and then he had to learn how to cross the canyon with the help of flicker. The only way to cross the canyon is to cancel the flicker, which occurs in 1/10 of a second at the perfect time. Otherwise, you can say goodbye to life. Then he will be able to meet with the passing mages and escape, and that will be the end of the training. It was possible to do so over the canyon of 20 flying boulders. Still, the pursuers were closer than he had expected. The distance between him and the mercenaries is 100 meters, and the flicker lasts 3 seconds. The only way to pass the test is to destroy the pursuers, because the rules do not prohibit it. The idea of destroying someone doesn't bother the hero, and it's not even that the plot has them as enemies of his parents, but that he feels he can win. When the enemies saw the boy, they immediately rushed to attack him, because he was alone and would be easy to defeat. Baek-Yu-Sol used flicker and quickly destroyed the enemy, without even feeling guilty. After all, he needed to survive. While the enemies were recovering, the guy started to run away and think about what to do next, because he had defeated only one. But the pursuers were faster than him and already standing before him, preparing their next attack. It was another magical attack, but this time with balls of fire that instantly approached Baek-Yu-Sol. He managed to use the flicker and dodge an attack that was supposed to reduce him to ashes. The attackers were already happy that they had destroyed their target and were about to investigate the site of the attack. Seizing the moment, Baek-Yu-Sol quietly counterattacked the pursuers. A feature of flicker is the preservation of momentum before and after use, so the guy quickly defeats another opponent. There are 2 more to go, and they must be finished before the other 2 catch up. The pursuers were shocked that the magician had such a high reaction rate. The guy could not dodge their attacks forever, especially at close range, so he ended it immediately. The enemy has already realized that Baek-Yu-Sol only uses a dagger and flicker, so he should protect his face and neck. The pursuer already prepared to attack. The hero did not expect that Baek-Yu-Sol would attack his comrade and destroy him. He was surprised that the guy used to run away like a rat, who never fought, but now he does. Baek-Yu-Sol interrupted him, said it was earlier and thanked him for helping him improve. The fight for survival began, and the threatening enemy took a stance. Knowing Baek-Yu-Sol's fighting style, the guy threw a spear at the enemy, who thought that the hero would hit him in the side. By throwing the spear, having deflected the spear, he looked to the side, but Baek-Yu-Sol was not there. The guy was planning to attack from the front, so Baek-Yu-Sol easily destroyed the pursuer. Baek-Yu-Sol sat down exhausted, both physically and morally, because he had to destroy a man to survive. This is definitely not a dream. The first flicker, battle and destruction are a time to leave this place. Although this is a bitter aftertaste of the battle, he has to think realistically. He has no money, so he finds 2 million credits by cheating mercenaries. The problem is that he has to cross this cliff. On the other side of the canyon, he noticed a group of mages, who asked if he could cross the abyss on a bridge, and the boy asked them to wait. The wizard stayed waiting, and said that he had to be at least a 3rd-class knight to be able to get over the cliff. Baek-Yu-Sol used the flicker without waiting, and had already jumped over several boulders. They were surprised because they had never seen such magic, and wondered if it was real magic and not a prank. The blue-haired wizard interrupted their discussion by saying it was a shimmering spell, while the wizards argued that the flicker could not be controlled. In direction and distance, the last pursuers had already appeared on the other side. Without waiting, one of the enemies casts a spell in the direction of Baek-Yu-Sol. Not expecting the attack, the guy noticed it too late but managed to dodge. Recharge time, flicker 3 seconds. Dodge all magic is impossible. You need to find the next boulder. But the mercenary did not think to wait long, and attacked the hero as quickly as possible. Baek-Yu-Sol dodged the attack, but the rock he was standing on was damaged, and he began falling into the abyss. All the boulders were far from him, but Baek-Yu-Sol hoped he would land on at least one and use the flicker. He managed to grab onto a rock, But another attack was already flying at him, and when he thought that he would say goodbye to his life, someone counterattacked the spell and saved the guy. It was an ice spear covered with lightning. Moreover, someone used 2 attributes. The wizard accurately calculated the trajectory without spending mana. Looking down, Becky's soul saw that it was a blue-haired sorceress. Frightened by the spells of this level, the pursuers finally quickly left the boy and disappeared in an unknown direction. After descending from the boulders and crossing the Becky Soul Gap, he finally met his rescuers and was safe. He wanted to thank his rescuer, but she turned away and said she did not do it to be thanked, so she advised him to ignore it. The girl had the most beautiful voice that Beck Usul had ever heard, but it was hard to communicate with her. In any case, the people who were chasing him are known as bandits who rob villages. But a cult of dark demons carries out most of this activity. This is where it all ends. As soon as Becky's soul escapes from the cliff, he will enter the territory of the mages, and the dark demons will not be able to pursue him. The beginning of the 2nd episode of Stella's Academy. It will be a difficult period for the hero to relive his school days. After a while, it was already dark, and the cart was traveling toward the magician's territory. In a warm wheelchair, Beck Usul slept and dreamed of memories from his childhood. Little Beck Yusup dreamed of becoming a magician and enthusiastically told his mother about it. His mother supported the boy, so she and his father went to great lengths to buy him an old magic volume. He read and studied this book daily, and studied hard to not disappoint his parents. He would read until late at night and fall asleep on the book, at which point his mother would cover him with a blanket while he slept sweetly. But one day the doctor confirmed the diagnosis, that Beck Usul had mana leakage syndrome, which scared his mother. The boy himself could not believe these words, and immediately burst into tears. The player did not understand whether these were the character's memories, or his. Beck Usul woke up in the morning, and the mage who wanted to wake him was sitting across from him, warning him that they would soon arrive in Lasoisha. The group decided to stop for breakfast to rest and continue on. The blue-haired sorceress stared at Beck Usul, which put Beck Usul in a stupor. But the beauty noticed the guy's gaze and immediately turned away, and he just smiled. Time in this world was closer to modernity than to the Middle Ages. Magic exists in the ethereal world, but in safe cities there are flying ships and trains. Right now, the group is heading to Lazoi to board a flying ship to Arcanium, where the real episode will begin. Arcanium has famous magic towers, nightly orders of magicians, and 5 academies, the most powerful of which is the Stella Academy. This academy is full of geniuses and nobles from all over the world, and the players still didn't understand how Beck managed to get there. The guy decided to test his skills, and thanks to his 6th sense and accelerated detection, he survived a cursed body that prevented him from accumulating mana, a congenital curse that Beck Usul has. But it allowed him to find the men around him with his 6th sense, and feel the attacks coming, even if he didn't look in their direction. Acceleration of detection allowed him to perceive everything, as if time had slowed down, if the attack was approaching him at a speed that a person could not detect. This is a necessary skill for Beck Usul since he cannot use mana, but can't use his 6th sense for long. The original Beck Usul had very low sensitivity, but the player removed some characteristics. In the world, skills are represented as levels and characteristics as stars, with the maximum level of 9 stars almost impossible to achieve. The hero invested in sensitivity to develop a 6th sense, and quickness of reaction, because endurance can be built in other ways. Strengthening the mana leakage syndrome is done in the academy, which means that the hero has no other choice if he wants to stop the end of the world and get cured. The wizards hurried Beck Usul's boyfriend, for it was time to leave. The blue-haired sorceress gave him a thoughtful look and got ready to go upon arrival in Lazoi Chubek. Usul boarded a flying ship and continued his journey to Arcanium. On it, the nobles mockingly gossiped about the boy, because he looked around like he had never been on a flying ship. They believed that the academy was contaminating itself with ordinary peasants and said this directly to Beck Usul's face. The guy just sighed at them, making the rich people angry and indignant at him. But then everyone started to make noise, because the princess of the kingdom of Adalhabet, Han beyond Adalhabet, appeared, a nobleman who was molesting Beck. Usul decided to address her, but she just gave him an angry look and walked on. The player mentions that she is the thief of the game world. There are always arguments between her and the main character, and in the end she goes to the other side. In some endings it will be destroyed. In others the Academy mocks it, as if the developers had a personal grudge against. She's popular with the male players and pretty, but Becca's all feels like she'll destroy him if he talks to her. He was hungry and decided to go to the cafeteria. However, when he saw the prices, he decided to eat at the Arcaneum. Everyone was announced that they would arrive at the Arcaneum in 10 minutes, so they needed to go down to the first floor. Finally, the player accepted that this is his reality now, and it's time to start standing by the window. Baek wondered if he was doing the right thing, and if he could survive in Stella's academy. His thoughts turned negative and he realized it would be tough, so only a negative answer came to mind. He wished he had something that could help him. He remembered an unread notification that appeared after he had defeated his pursuers. The notification offered to select an item or skill, mentioning the return of light and praise with a flash. Still, the system gave it to high-level items. Then he decided to take the hyperspace flicker skill, but the system again refused and suggested only a slight improvement. The system tells us that the force that drives the plot is called the power of the story. This power will accumulate if the hero explores unknown branches of the story. So Baek can't get items for the late game, because he's still a newbie. The player then remembered Bulbul for the glasses, and the system agreed with the hero for a while, and gave him this item. Bullseye glasses contain all the information the player has collected over time, because they cannot be recalled in the game. So players have developed items to store information on their own. The player was no exception. Since the player is in real life, he cannot live using the game system, but the glasses will help him regain some of his skills. Someone started discussing a girl who was passing by Azel, and they said she was the eldest daughter of the traitor Dutch map. One function of the eyepiece allows you to register or verify information about a character in the story. So after checking it, Baek realizes that she is a fake character. To understand the fake heroine, you must know that the game Ethereal World is based on the fantasy novel Don't Love the Princess. This novel is about the heroine Hazel who lost her family. She grows up facing Hong Bion's plans and in the end, stays with the main character. Her husband, her plan of revenge completely disappears, and the male characters protect her. The novel's sad ending comes after readers give it harsh reviews. The problem is that the world is based on a novel, but a character named Flame appeared in the game, and took on the role of the main character. Besides, she had a backstory. She was an ordinary girl from the modern world who regularly read Don't Like the Princess and was transported to the world. Thus Azel becomes a fake heroine in the game, while the Frame becomes the real heroine. Despite numerous attempts by the players, Azel could not survive on any route. As a result, she was pushed out of the position of the real heroine. Baek felt that he had seen Azel and decided to get ready. After a while, all the students were gathered for an introductory speech about dark, demonic people and their invasion. This speech was boring for the students, because everyone knew they were magicians, and their purpose was to protect the world from dark forces. The ceremony was followed by the swearing-in of 4 students, admitted with high marks and a representative of the freshmen. The students went up to the stands with shining faces, befitting their position as protagonists. But among them Mei Yuzhen was the brightest, handsome and intelligent at the same time, and he scored the highest points. This character has a status of 9 stars, and has the potential to be close to the realm of the gods. He is a natural genius among geniuses, and can control all the elements of the world. Even if Baek's soul can't reach the true ending, he should avoid bad endings by turning Mayusen to the good side. But it all depends on Flame's future behavior. Since she is from the same reality as the player, they may get along. Things will be complicated if the girl considers him an enemy, so he shouldn't take any chances, since Baek has the advantage in terms of information. However, Baek importance in this story is no more than that of a non-fiction character from a village shop. Moreover, the heroine has a special ability to purify dark people, but she also can impoverish people. Being around her will undoubtedly affect Baek's soul, so his role is to support the main characters from afar, and avoid contacting them, if possible. At this point, the boys' thoughts were interrupted by applause. and the induction ceremony, and the second episode of the Stella Academy induction were completed. The player was sitting in the classroom. Even though he had graduated from university long ago, it was a strange feeling to be a high school student again. But still, he was given a watch that proves he is a student of Stella Academy, and with them he can get better treatment and service. Baek Yusol considered using them as soon as possible, and going for a walk in the city. The door to the classroom opened, and a man with a large scar on his face came in, and asked everyone to take their seats. The exam is about to begin, so everyone needs to remove all unnecessary items. Students who wear glasses will be subject to an additional check. The curriculum at Stella Academy is more rigorous than in Korean universities. On the first day, everyone passes an exam to be enrolled in the class. The exam paper's questions were quite difficult. Baek Yusol did not even understand what was written there. The class placement exam has no relation to the entrance exam. At the exam, students are assigned to classes from F to S. All the main characters will obviously get the S grade, so Baek Yusol wonders if he can turn in a blank sheet. However, he is automatically enrolled in the F grade. Musin caught the boy's attention, and he was just sitting there bored, resting his head on his hand. Being a genius, he was the first to write an exam paper, so all I had to do was sit and be bored. Musun's characteristic feature was boredom. He was born into the strongest family in the world. As a genius in talent, everything came very easily to him. That is why Musun's character could be defined as evil or good, depending on how the main character behaved. Dark demonic people, who worked to destroy people, obviously would be very interested in Musun. Baek Yusol hasn't written anything yet, but he mentioned glasses because he often used them to gain skills. By studying them in the library, during the game, before he could get his glasses, the teacher appeared next to him, and reminded him that they needed to be checked. When he was wearing them, a man took Baek Yusol's glasses, and taught him to check them carefully with magic. The boy was scared and panicked, because he could be expelled from the academy. But the teacher didn't notice any mana and asked me to ask in advance. Next time, putting on the glasses, all the answers were visible on the sheet. So at this rate, Baek Yusol may get a higher grade than he expected. At that time, the teacher loudly said that the exam was over, and I flew up with my exam papers and headed straight for him. Having managed to answer only 3 questions, Baek Yusol resigned himself to the fact that he would not be able to reach a higher grade. After reading the answers, the man made the boy quickly hand over his glasses. Suspecting something, the teacher studied the glasses again, checked them even more carefully, and asked one of the students to bring Dr. Grein in. Dr. Grein, a professor of magical engineering, looked at the glasses carefully, and checked them with more careful magic than the teacher. The teacher asked if Baek Yusol had really cheated on the exam, and the professor assured him that he had not, and did not feel any magical energy from the glasses. Dr. Graham said that the boy had resolved the issue, and advised Professor Lee Hanwal to apologize to the student, and teach him well. The teacher admitted that he had misunderstood, and apologized to the boy. However, he really cheated, and it would have been problematic if all the functions of the glasses had worked. Professor Lee Hanwell's office was actively checking exam sheets. An elderly female professor, Adele Taman, who was passing by, noticed Lee Hanwell and approached him. She heard that there are especially many interesting and strong freshmen. This year Princess Hong Bian, of the Kingdom of Adelbet, belonged to one of the most prestigious families in the etheric world, even nicknamed the Kingdom of Mud. Crown Prince Jeremy Scalban defeated all his older brothers, and became the Crown Prince of the Scalban Empire. At the age of 12, Hei Won-yang is the heir to the world's best magic tower of archmages, the Twilight Tower. Edel praised Lee for the many interesting questions on the exam, which were quite challenging to pass, even for students from elite families, and the man thanked her. This year, a new type of question was asked in the test for admission to the class, and the first 3 were precisely the kind of questions that ordinary students would find difficult to solve. A flexibility test where if you can't answer correctly, you skip it and quickly solve the next question. The era of cold steel is over, and now warriors magicians solve problems with creativity, logic, and critical thinking, turning their minds into weapons. However, these questions were destined to be unsolvable, as more than 1,141 students left the questions blank. Most of the new students could not give any correct answers, and only 3 could answer all 3 questions correctly. Ma Yuzhen, who appeared like a comet and swept through the magical world, was called the century's genius. Flame, who was recognized for her special abilities and talent, comparable to that of Ma Yuzhen, entered the school on the principal's recommendation, and among these geniuses Baek Yusol, who appeared out of nowhere, was strangely among them. Ma Yuzhen and Flame are considered geniuses, but Baek Yusol had the lowest score on his entrance exam, and no one expected him to solve these 3 difficult questions. Professor Edel wondered why Li Hanawal was so interested in Baek Yusol's assessments, to which the man replied that his assessment seemed meaningless. The professor objected that it made sense because, after all, formulas and equations could not solve them, so he could solve them without knowing anything. The man asked if Baek Yusol could be a genius, and Adele said it could also be a coincidence. On his desk was Baek Yusol's file, with a note that, in appreciation of his amazing ability to control the flicker, he was allowed to enter under exceptional circumstances. This note was left by Stella, the Academy's director, so the professor was interested in what would happen next. The next day, the long-awaited classification results were announced, and even geniuses were nervous. The player also had to personally check which class he was in. Even though the game could check it with just 1 click, the students noticed him and started gossiping that he had scored 0 points on the entrance test in the application of magic. When he looked at the list of F-ranked students, he did not see his name, and thought he had failed the test by answering only 3 questions. Disappointed, he decided to leave. But when he heard the students talking about him again, he returned and rechecked the table. Looking at the board, Baek Yusol was surprised because his name was next to the highest class S. Class S was special, unlike classes F and A. It literally meant that only students with something special got there. It was very unusual that the hero was assigned to the S class, a place that every student of Stella Academy, the most prestigious magical academy, dreamed of. Now Baek Yusol will have more contact with the main characters in Class S, which he wanted to avoid as much as possible, so he decided to think more positively. The territory of the Academy was considered huge even in the Arcanium, and thanks to all the necessary measures, students did not have to leave its territory. In addition, the Academy had many private rooms for nobles, and Hongbyong's mother used to scold her in one of them. She was annoyed that the girl answered the 3 questions incorrectly, because even Princess Azel answered too. Hongbyong fell to the floor and listened to her mother's reproaches. Professor Hong Yale, a professor of the element of fire, she didn't want the girl to become like her, kicked out of the kingdom and holding on to some stupid professorship. The princess cannot become a disgrace to the kingdom. She must become better than her sister, told her mother. Hong Yale asked if the girl understood what her mother wanted her to do, and she answered in the affirmative. But she didn't understand, because she just lived the way she was taught, and solved problems the way she was taught, and only quietly wondered why her mother was torturing her. The first class of freshmen's classroom is packed with students, all waiting for the professor to start the lecture. The S class was full of eccentrics, who showed no signs of being sociable, which gave Baek Yusol mixed feelings. When the students saw the boy, they began to say that their parents protested why he was in the S class, but they were told that Baek Yusol had all the necessary skills for this. It didn't surprise him because they all worked hard, so they were outraged that an unknown fool would be in the same class. According to the Academy's rules, students' classes are moved up or down, depending on their performance after each test. Yet the player was still amazed by all the game characters in front of him. In a few years, all the students of this class will become famous all over the world. 5 of these students, including Ma Yuzhen, have the potential to betray the magical world. It would be nice if Flame could prevent this. At this point, Professor Li Hanwal entered the classroom to greet the students. Although many of the students had seen him, he still introduced himself officially. Some students recognized him, and heard that the number of demonic creatures he hunted had almost reached 4 figures. The man asked everyone to calm down and emphasized that this year there are many talented students and 1 unique student. The academy is where martial artists are trained. For 3 harsh years of study, so the professor wanted everyone to show their best. The man asked if anyone had questions and heard only silence, so he decided it was time to start the lesson. All the students focused on the back door, where a girl with long silver hair walked out with a big gate. It was Hong Beyond. She was late and valued principles more than anyone else, which was quite unusual. So Baek Yusol decided to test her with an eyepiece. The information he could get was not much. Initially, Hong Bai-yen was a well-known character, and most of the information written here was already known. If Azel goes to the next world because of flame, then Hong Byong because of flame and Azel. We can say that this is the inevitable fate of a thief. If Baek Yusol could have saved her, he would have saved her, but he's not in a position to do so. Although he feels embarrassed, he has to keep his distance. The teacher asked the girl to take her seat, and she looked at Baek Yusol and came and sat next to him. There was a feeling that everything was going wrong. The professor also reminded us that there will be a procedure for changing the staff. For the staff that students will use at school, the staff in classes S and A will be replaced at the same time, which was a little annoying for the hero, but he was looking forward to it. Stella Academy has planned 2 critical events, one of which is signing the contract with the family, the second ceremony of receiving the wand. As in the case of the elite, Stella Academy is changing the staff, which is just as special. Professor Lee Han-wol gathered everyone in a place where the load of middle-class staff were prepared. All students need to do is come up and choose a staff member, because the process of replacing a staff member is very difficult. In fact, they do not choose the staff, but vice versa. In the ethereal world, the staff reacts only to the person who, in their opinion, is worthy of commanding them, causing a resonance effect. In essence, you cannot use high-level staff just because you want to. In any case, Baek Yusol doesn't know which staff to choose, because he would have selected the staff for the F class. But since he is in the S class, he needs to think the stick best suited for a boy is a magic wand, because staffs are divided into 2 forms, short and long staffs. Wands are usually wielded by knights who quickly destroy magic, and staffs are used by bishops, who focus on a single blow with a longer spell time. The other students wondered which staff Baek Yusol would choose, but he didn't care about their opinions. Suddenly one of the students approached the boy, and boldly introduced himself as Uslek. This was the first time Baek Yusol had heard the name, which surprised him. Uslek asked Baek Yusol what kind of staff he wanted to choose, and recommended that he choose one that corresponded to the status of a commoner. He was also asked not to create problems for the teachers, to which the hero agreed, and recommended that Uslek not create them either. This phrase made us like angry, so Baek Yusol decided to check him with glasses. There was little information, so he was not important. In any case, the student came up to tell him that he would choose a staff, so the hero should be more careful. This is the staff of Edmure Edamiri, which has the highest staff classification. The middle high-class staff is usually used by professionals, so learning about it will be difficult. No matter how talented a student is, even professional, magical warriors can hardly handle a middle or low-class staff. There's also one middle high-class staff member, who is not meant to be chosen by anyone, but rather to show off. The teacher ordered everyone to come up and stand with the staff. They liked as soon as Lee Han-wol's words were spoken. Each student immediately moved to the desired staff, and most of the students in Class A immediately resonated with the sticks. Many chose middle-class staff, including Prince Scalwin and Princess Hong. Beyond this surprised everyone, because many magicians who have already received official licenses are hardly able to choose a medium-class stick. These resonances really irritated Uslek, so he decided to go over and take the middle-high class. Edmure Edamiri staff, which he coveted. He confidently picked it up to show everyone what a real S-class looks like. Still, as expected, there was no resonance. The students were frightened because he seemed to be badly injured, and quickly called the teacher. So Uslek had to surrender. After all, the owner of this wand had been determined from the beginning. Ma Yuzan approached Edmure Edamiri, and his shining eyes reflected a rare enthusiasm. Everyone doubted him, but the next scene dispelled their doubts. Mayasong managed to resonate with the staff too easily. The students' jaws dropped when Mayasong took out his wand and waved. Even though the genius existed with their own eyes, it was still incredible looking into the crowd. Ma Yusong noticed Baek Yusol's gaze, and he unexpectedly smiled sincerely at him. According to the game's storyline, Flame owned another high-end wand, but things were different. When Flame conquers Terry Vaughn, it arouses the curiosity of Musin, who will be intrigued, which will make him interested in her. Otherwise, other possibilities open up. This girl was not a part of the game, and I had to remember the possibility that they would go the wrong way. So the hero finally spotted Flame, who seemed to be moving confidently toward Tervon. Her frown as she walked among the strange wands suggested that she was not interested in Tervon at all. Since she was the protagonist of this world with endless possibilities, she could resonate with any wand. If she had resonated with the other wand, just like that, it would have created difficulties if Mayusin's path had been erased. So Bakusol decided to hint at her. Although he didn't want to make contact with the heroes, he used Flicker. He immediately found himself behind the girl, which confused her a bit. Bakusol asked her in a friendly manner which staff she would choose, to which she snapped that it was none of his business. This confused him because he knew Flame was very sociable and got along well with nobles and commoners, but he could not back down so easily. He said that he wanted to help her choose a staff member, but no matter what he said, she was even more angry. Bakusol said that he had heard a lot about her and knew that the staff of Terravon would suit her, so he pointed to it. When he heard a strange noise, the guy turned around, looked at what was happening and wanted to take his hand away, but his hand seemed to become heavier. A heavy sensation of something gently stroking his arm prompted him to check his outstretched left hand, the silver stick lying silently under. Before Bakusol could realize the situation, Taven was the first to act, and a loud sound not unlike Edmiri Mayusin's was heard. In an instant, the room was silent and all eyes were on Bakusol's left hand, which made Flame even angrier. The Academy campus was bustling with activity, and everyone was focused on the fact that this year, 2 students had entered the residence with above-average sticks. There were only 5 of them in the entire long history, and 2 more appeared together in 1 year. Someone heard that 5 of them became archmages about Bakusol. They were surprised that he used Flicker in a demonstration exam for magical skills even though it was considered trash. Hearing these rumors, Flame continued walking down the corridor, thinking it had finally become quieter. After class, the independent study building was filled with students. Still they talked only about Mayusin and Bakusol, which made her nervous. She wondered who Bakusol was, and if he could easily resonate with Tervon. Flame read the novel 3 times before coming here, but such a character never appeared. It said no one could capture Tervon but to resonate with him so easily, as if Bakusol wanted to show off to her. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts, and she hastened to hide her expression. Turning around, she saw several girls walking toward her. They asked if she was planning to study independently, and Flame, as always, addressed them as children. One of the girls asked why she called them children. She again forgot that she was the same age as them, so she justified herself by saying that where she lived, she was always treated as the eldest. After realizing she had been transported into the novel from the modern world, she could hardly behave like a child. One of the girls asked if Flame would be studying alone. It was Jackie, whom she had known for a long time, and they became fast friends when they entered the academy. Flame said she had a special extracurricular activity, and agreed to meet at a cafe later. After chasing the girls away, she quickly turned to leave, but someone accidentally bumped into her. He was One Ryong, a boy with a sharp mind and crimson hair that went wonderfully with his violet eyes. He apologized and asked if she was okay because she didn't look well, and it was probably a rare occasion when he was so genuinely concerned. Then he also asked if the girl would be doing self-study, to which she said yes, and asked if he was going back to the exclusive S classroom. After exchanging a few more phrases, One Ryung smiled and said goodbye to Flame. Flame thought it was rude, and was about to leave when she noticed someone watching them. It was Jackie, but after being seen, she disappeared so quickly that eye contact seemed like a short dream. But Flame was not in the mood for that. So Flame came to a special additional meeting, where she was interested in something more than the training itself. Princesses Hung, Beyond and Hazel were to attend an additional class on the original fantasy novel, and the protagonist and the villain might confront each other. With these thoughts in mind, she came to the lecture hall, where a special extracurricular class was taking place, and slowly looked around. An additional lesson was taught by Kyle, a 17th ranked grade boy, who was theoretically one of the Academy's best students. He was giving an extra class for those who lacked grades, but since there were many students from Class S, his expression was gloomy. Mayusin was sitting next to Baek Yusol, who seemed bored, but the genius was clearly interested in him. Flame thought Baek Yusol hadn't solved anything but the 3 questions from hell, just because he knew that would get him into S class. If Baek Yusol knew and behaved like that in advance, then he is dangerous. Flame finished her thoughts. At that time, Baek Yusol was sitting and thinking about how to get rid of Mayusin, who was looking at him and pretending to be modest and friendly. They had a short dialogue, in which Mayusin asked why the guy came here, because in his opinion he didn't need to listen to such things. In fact, he had no reason to be here. He was just ordered to participate because of his bad grades. Afterward, Kyle asked us to stop talking and start an additional lesson. Today they will be reviewing the placement test. As everyone knows, this placement test had notorious problems, and Kyle solved one of them. Hong Bion's eyes sparkled at these words, and that was the only reason she came to this place. Kyle saw that Baek Yusol was among the students, and decided to prove to him that he was better than him. So first he will show how he solved it himself, after which many students will take out their notes, and start writing everything down. Kyle said this task is actually close to a trap. It was created to accidentally cause wrong answers. Bak Yusuf thought it was only a plausible decision, not the right one, but Musin, who caught this moment, blinked his eyes and tapped him softly on the shoulder. Ma Yusong asked if the boy thought it was right, and the hero, who was scared, decided to be honest and said he was unsure. Although Baek Yusol spoke quietly, the room was so quiet that most of the students, including Kyle, heard me. This angered him so much that he was so sure he was right that he invited the boy to solve the problem himself. He looked at Mei Yusin, who was supporting him, confused, and the hero thought that he had done it on purpose. Having no choice, he went to the bottom of the classroom, took the chalk from the lecturer, put on his glasses, and started to make. It was said to be 3 questions of the devil, but it was almost meaningless. For example, a magician says to the great earth, "Shed tears when he says this spell. The mass of the earth doubles." The answer to this question was simple. The elements of the earth grouped together, so the world's mass doubled. However, Kyle analyzed the problem from a mathematical point of view. When the spell activates, the elements quickly combine under the influence of the mana catalyst, and so on. Whatever the solution was, it didn't matter if the answer was correct. Still, Baek Yusol couldn't show how to solve it, only pointing out the mistakes. Baek Yusol asked if his formula would be correct if there was wind instead of earth, to which Kyle replied that he would then use the second method. But Baek Yusol said that then you need to do things differently, and Kyle got the right answer only by luck, not because it was designed that way. The guy knew little about magic, so he only pointed out the main part indicated on Bulbul's glasses. There was no need for complicated explanations to prove that Kyle's decision was wrong. Still, bright students understood the words and started writing them down. The flame was also quite surprised, but remained calm instead. She looked at Isel and hung beyond. At this point they were supposed to have a fierce quarrel, but since they could not solve the problem that Baek Yusol had just pointed out, they were distracted by it. Shortly after that, the special extracurricular lesson ended, and Baek Yusol left the classroom faster than anyone else. After vigorously saying goodbye to Ma Yusong, he walked down the shabby corridor, and thought it best not to contact him again. He didn't want to see him again. Gradually, there were fewer people, and I was about to return to the dormitory. Still, someone stood in the quarters corner with his back to the wall. It was Princess Hong Byong. The hero tried to pass by, pretending not to know her, but she stopped before him. She had a question, and the hero was surprised that Princess Hong Byong herself wanted to ask him something. She asked why Baek Yusol had not explained the solution to the infernal question earlier, but it's not that he didn't explain it, he just couldn't, because how can you logically explain a meaningless quiz? Baek Yusol simply had nothing to say, which the princess misunderstood and thought suggested that he did not want to explain the decision in such a place, so she promised to pay fair compensation, so he wouldn't come up with a solution, and she asked him to explain the decision to her. Baek Yusol and Hong Byong rented a study room, where no one disturbed them, Now they sat face to face with only a table between them. So the guy asked why she was paying him just to understand 3 questions on the test, to which the girl said she had her reasons. He also asked her if she had solved all but 3 questions, while he had only solved 3, and if she was ashamed of herself. The girl said no, but she was only ashamed that she still did not understand them. She was a really good student. So Baek Yusol did not understand why she asked him for help. She was a princess and she should have someone to help her. Hong Bian said that 3 students, including Baek Yusol, answered the question out of 1,141 freshmen. These issues were complicated, but Ma Yuzhen Flame and Baek Yusol solved them, so the princess had no choice. Only then did Baek Yusol realize that these questions were tricky, and why he was so easily in the S-class. He also realized why Flame was keeping him. He didn't know the world's intricacies, or even know about these insidious questions. But Flame is different because she reads the whole novel, even without knowing the plot of the game. She must know most of the plot parameters, even about 3 questions. Since an outsider who was not in the original Flame interfered with the game, there was no choice but to recognize Baek Yusol's existence. After concluding that Flame had reasons for his behavior, the princess noticed something was wrong with him. Still, Baek Yusol assured her that she shouldn't worry, so he decided to remind her that she had promised to fulfill his request, in gratitude for helping her resolve the issue. Recalling that the blacksmiths from her kingdom were talented craftsmen, he asked them to turn his stick into a magic sword. This request surprised the princess, because only low-level mercenaries use such weapons. Still, the hero only replied that it suited his style. He didn't want to explain his limitations, so he asked if she could do it, and she said that she could because it should be easy. So the hero began his explanation by saying that the way to solve this is to change perspectives, which surprised Hong Bi-young. The princess's weakness is that the magic she uses is strictly by the book, and that she is stuck in a routine. But she realized this only in her 2nd year at the academy. After a severe defeat by Flame, knowing that Baek Yusol cannot give her any vital knowledge right now, he can push her in the right direction. Turning the test paper toward Hong Bian, he earnestly asked her if she knew what a stupid question was. The girl was surprised by such an unexpected and straightforward question, but answered that she had probably heard it, but did not know what it was. So to explain that, Baek Yusuf gave an example. He asked what is between the knee and the knee. The princess was confused by the question, but she gathered her thoughts, and said that it was the back of her knee, to which the boy replied that the correct answer was the same. Baek Yusol reminded us what is between the knee and the knee. Although it was an absurd question, it had its own logic. This made Hong Byung a little angry, but the boyfriend calmed her down, and asked her to look into the matter more carefully. The task consists of formulas and tricks that the princess did not know, meaning it must be solved creatively. So Baek Yusol asked her if it was possible to memorize this work like all the others, and she replied that it was impossible. Of course, knowing most spells and techniques is essential for a magician, but it is more critical for him to look at the world outside of his thoughts. Magic can develop even with the slightest change. But the princess thinks of things the way I see them, so spells should not only be memorized and recited. Hong Bian may be better at analytical thinking and judgment than Baek Yusol. Still, they lack an essential trait for a magician: creativity. After finishing his monologue, Baek Yusol looked at the princess. Her expression was solemn and intense. The guy asked if the girl understood everything, because it sounded pretty tricky. And the girl replied with determination and enthusiasm. It's fascinating because Baek Yusol had no idea what he was saying. So he was glad the princess understood and decided to start. The first question was what a person said to a horse when putting it to sleep, and the girl did not know the answer. But the answer was that it was time to go to sleep in the pasture. The next question was why the beds were working hard, and again the princess did not know. So Baek Yusol answered that she was always at work. The third question was what happened when the rock, paper and scissors entered the race. Hong Byung was silent again, and the answer was that the rock rolled away and the rest remained. The princess was so tense that she was ready to throw up. Noticing this, Baek Yusol decided to ask a more straightforward question. The next question was about what a cloud said to the ocean when it rained. And the princess thought a little and answered correctly that it got a little emotional. Hong Bian was happy to have given the correct answer, and smiled sincerely. It was the first time Baek Yusol had seen her smile. In both the game and real life, Baek Yusol praised her, and said that her creativity as a princess was second to none. She accepted the compliment and asked the next question. After the special lecture for Hong Bian ended, Baek Yusol immediately left the academy and headed to the Arcaneum. In the end, the hero spent about 3 hours asking the princess questions, and he did not expect her to believe him. Hong Bian was a good and intelligent magician, but her drawback was her stereotypical thinking. This does not mean that I as a boy could have used her to my advantage, for which I even felt very guilty, but it was essential to forge Trayvon into a sword. After summarizing the results, I had to hurry to the bookstore to buy the books I needed for my classes at the academy. After wandering around Baek Yusol for a while, he came to an unnamed bookstore. It was rather old and hidden. When the guy creaked open the door of the crumbling bookstore, which seemed to scare away even ghosts, he was greeted by the smell of musty books behind the counter. The old man was napping. This perv was pretending to be napping and watching the guest. With his magic detection skills, Baek Yusol had a goal. This is a rather old book containing Yahello's handwritten notes. He graduated from Stella Academy 10 years ago. In the game you could take a class by pressing a button, while in real life you could read a textbook on the specialty. Baek Yusol used to buy textbooks in expensive bookstores, but then he learned that much better textbooks were hidden in stores, without signs. Maybe the grades didn't matter because he had smart glasses, but there were hidden recipes inside, so he could find something useful later. No one touched it. Mila's name was clearly written on the handwritten notes, on the theory of magical engineering. When the hero reached for it from the other side, someone grabbed the book he had chosen. Baek Yusol turned his head slightly and saw a blue-haired girl, a little smaller than him, convulsively pulling her hands away as if they were on fire. Startled, the boy called her by her first name. Hazel wondered how he knew her name, but Baek Yusol said she was famous. She tossed back the strands of her sky-blue hair and looked intently at the hero, remembering where she had seen him, but not before the entrance, mentioning that they were in the same group, and said that she liked the explanation from the extracurricular activity, but regretted that he did not explain it thoroughly. If you think about it, Hazel couldn't solve all these problems, so when trying to solve one, she could contact my USAN or not. In any case, it was nice to meet her. She turned her head and walked in the other direction. By the way, why did she end up in a used bookstore? The guy hastily pulled out Mila's notebook, and if he hadn't lost it, everything would have been great. Then he took out the books one by one and looked at Hazel, who took out book after book. But strangely enough, she didn't care about the price tag. This bookstore sells primarily old books, so few people come here except for poor students like Baek Yusol. Hazel, as a person from a dysfunctional family who lost everything, probably had no choice but to come here, because her father was destroyed by dark, demonic people. Sadly, a princess like her comes to buy used books, but she cares about the price because she has no money. Even in the novel, her end is tragic. And here, where Flame has become a heroine, she is doomed to disappear before reaching her sad ending. While Baek Yusol was choosing books, I collected more than 10 when I put them on the tabletop. The old man opened his eyes in surprise, clearly impressed by my choice. Isol squinted at him in the textbooks, noting that the subjects he chose seemed interesting to her. She was curious why he chose advanced ceiling theory, even though the subject had few prospects and was unpopular among others. Sealing is an ancient magic based on objects like wands. Still, with the development of alchemy and enchantment, it gradually became a lost technology. Hazel looked at him with an expression of incomprehension, and he was embarrassed to admit that he only knew about it because of the game. But he said that everyone would think it was not a necessary subject, so it was easier to get the best grades in this class. You people want to attend a class on compaction theory, but that's why Baek Yusol can spend less time than others and get better grades. It was challenging to continue the conversation, so the guy jumped out of the store and looked back to see Hazel with a not promising expression. The next day, Hazel checked the schedule and discovered that the first lecture at Stella Academy was a subject called nihilism. She had heard rumors that it was easy to get good grades there, so even though it was not her major, she hurried to apply to study it. However, when information spread that getting good grades was easy, a large number of students gathered. Hazel, who always had to be the best to get a scholarship, was unhappy because she would have to work hard on other subjects. As Hazel walked down the corridor, she suddenly heard students crowding around and discussing the lunch menu. Her stomach grumbled, reminding her of hunger. She had 60 meal tickets, but they were barely enough for the semester, so she had to save money all the time. On her way to the cafeteria, Hazel stopped by the hall where Becusile, a student she had met yesterday, was giving the Introduction to Seal Studies lecture. Just in case, she looked inside and noticed Becusile in the distance, listening to the teacher with a blank expression. She also looked at the other students, but not many had terrible grades. Applying for the Introduction to the Study of Seals will save you time, improve your grades, and help you rise in rank and receive a larger scholarship. So Hazel thought. Becusile knew that scoring many points in this subject would be easy. That means he planned all his classes to make his life easier. Could be a coincidence, Hazel thought, and moved on. Everyone knows about the origins of magic, but it was only when the White Wizard, also called the Forefather Wizard, spread magic in the world that people and other races could control. Lidden, a professor of divine lunar studies, began his lecture. He was not popular because of his harsh and aggressive voice, which strained the audience. After natural magic spread among elves, metal manipulation among dwarves, and elemental magic among humans, the mage forefather disappeared. Becusile was not happy because he had to go to school again for 3 years. At this age in the game, he could skip everything with one button. However, this lecture is critical, because it may contain at least a clue to the true ending the hero thought he would have. Becusile looked around. Isabel, who was sitting a little further away, caught his attention. Was she taking this class? As far as he remembered, there was no one else here. Not that Beck used all cared, but seeing her here was rather unusual. The magician started traveling the world and stealing the magic of other species, but this did not satisfy them. They wanted to learn more magic. This happened because the mage father disappeared, leaving behind the 12 new moons in the world, and the lecturer asked if anyone knew about them. Hazel mentioned that the 12 new moons are guardians, called to protect the balance of the continents. They spread worldwide only 1,000 years ago. The professor confirmed that she was correct, and that they defended their continent using their special abilities. For example, the divine moon, the symbol of summer, the 6th month of the red summer, had a red flame, and it is said that this flame never went out. If you go into the deep sea of Alamanca, you can still see the red flames, and any of the students can go and see them. He wasn't joking, but the students laughed, because the depths of the Alamanca Sea were an absolute no-go zone, ruled by the Sea King of Alamanca. The teacher calmed the students down and pointed to the board, which showed Levi's coast, a whirlpool in the middle of the ocean, frozen by the 12th month of blue winter. Each of the 12 months has individual powers, but it is said that if you combine them, a miracle will happen. The students asked what kind of miracle would happen, but no one knew what would happen, because they had fallen asleep 1,000 years ago. Thinking the lecturer was right, Becusile mentioned that he had met several moons while playing the game. Still, he had met 5 of them only in a time-limited event. This became possible only because the player took information from other players. In the community, he was the only one who had met for so many months. If the hero understood correctly, these months are the key to the true ending. No one could get to them, so the answer was hidden in them at the time. He managed to meet only 5 at significant risk, but he had no choice if he wanted to witness the true end. During a lecture on practical combat, a huge doll bursts into flames, causing a powerful explosion, and students fire magical attacks at a target. This practical subject was taught by Hong Byong's mother, Professor Hong Yel of the fire class. She told the students that shooting fast is not always important, and even if you have powerful magic skills, they are useless if you do not hit the enemy. Although everyone was listening to the teacher, the students' attacks exploded midair, unable to scratch the target. Then a powerful flash of magic appeared behind her, tearing through the air and almost certainly flying into the mannequin. There was a large explosion, followed by a lot of smoke that covered the entire area of damage. But when the smoke cleared, the dummy had only a few scratches. Professor Hong Yel looked at the painting, came up to Hong Byong and said that it was just horrible. Hong Byong turned pale at these words but closed her eyes tightly, trying not to give away her chaotic emotions. Then the princess could not stand it, and went and sat down on the bench, showing her mother a miserable sight again. So she thought that her mother was disappointed with her. The terrible pressure of failure came down on her chest, and she fought against it, trying to catch her breath while cold sweat dripped down her forehead. Hong Byong thought she might faint, but she stubbornly held on, showing superhuman strength of spirit, and approached her. While sitting, she asked if everything was okay, and sat beside the princess to support her and ask her questions. The girl was fascinated by the fact that the princess used the same magic as she did, but stronger. However, these words were disregarded because the princess did not even hit. But the girl didn't care that Hong Beyond missed the target, because in her opinion the magic itself was unsurpassed and very cool. The girl began to tell her that she had heard a lot about the princess, and looked up to her, and Hong Byong remembered her. The girl's name is Arshwin. She's the genius of a new attribute of fire. The princess thought, this girl must be much worse than her in comparison to her magic. Since the princess remembered who she was, and how she had shown herself in training, she said sarcastically that it must be nice to have such high accuracy. Arshwin, ignoring the princess's sarcasm, said that if she trained, she would not even be able to match the princess. Hong Byong abruptly ended the conversation, turning around and leaving, although she thanked us for making her feel better. Arshwin didn't like this manner of communication. She looked at her blankly, and thought it was probably normal for a princess. She came to the restroom and sat down helplessly. Even her legs went numb and she lost all sensation. She was greeted in the room by the princess's personal bodyguard. Hong Beyond Yuri, tall for a woman, so the princess looked up slightly when talking to her. Yuri put the princess's favorite delicacies on the table, tea and red ginseng candies, and the guard decided to discuss the stick that Baek Yusul had ordered. She was told that a high-end sword would be made, since it was a good stick, but there was something that seemed questionable to her. She had heard that the wand constantly sucks mana from the person using it. The princess was surprised and thought it was a dark, demonic instrument still. Jerry assured her that it constantly resonated with nature. Hong Beyond thought, such a worthless object couldn't be of the middle class. It was downgraded to mid-range high, because of its original ability to dramatically increase the user's mana. They both wondered how a student could use it. No one could use a stick like that, because you either have a lot of mana or you don't. But Hong Beyond was sure that Baek Yusul would figure it out anyway. He was unique. A few days have passed since Professor of Arbortology, Money Carlin, taught a class. At the beginning of the semester, he emphasized that classes in monorthology are mandatory, because attacking magic requires more detailed study than other types of magic. Starting today, student duels will study biology, emphasizing shooting and targeting. So the professor set a formula to determine which attribute is needed. To solve the given formula, all the students fell silent, and began to solve the problem the teacher gave them. Many people thought that the answer was an attribute of water. Without this attribute of water, it is impossible to answer this question. But Baek Yusul was even more bored, because these subjects were no more difficult than the ones he studied. In Korea, the professor noticed the boy's boredom and was annoyed, so he invited him to come to the board and solve the problem. After a while, Baek Yusul solved this problem, and the professor praised him for easily organizing the hyperbolic equation. The teacher thought that his first magic was an attribute of water, which the hero refused, and after a while, the professor ended the class. So Baek Yusul, having already packed up and said goodbye to the teacher, left the classroom immersed in his thoughts. But his thoughts were not. After apologizing to Isabel Pass, she approached the boy and wanted to ask him a few questions. Observing Baek Yusul Ashel, she realized he was undoubtedly smart. If you did not consider his grades, he was smarter even than the freshman. Baek Yusul solved the question at a level that was, at least professorial. Ashel wondered, even if the Stella Academy is a place where geniuses gather, what Baek Yusul's personality is. At first she thought it was unrealistic, but now she is sure that he has a strategy for registering for courses. So she asked him what the next subject he would choose would be, to which Baek used all thought and asked if he was interested, which made the girl a little angry. He is an adult and what he does is his business. In any case, he asked why she was asking. Hazel inquired about the classes he was taking. They all are where you can get high grades. She wanted to learn the exact strategy because it was essential to her. So she quickly ended the dialogue and told him it was time to go. She didn't like it much. So she gathered her thoughts and called out to Baek Yusul, who was already doing business. She caught up with him and asked him to wait. He said he didn't understand why she was following him, and that she should learn strategy from someone else. He said she could just go to the same classes with him, but she objected that it could negatively affect his grades. If Hazel doesn't get it, she will lose the most. But even in this situation, she worries about other people. The girl made a cute face and asked me to recommend one subject where it is easy to get high marks. Her beautiful face did not impress Baek Yusul and did not convince him, which surprised the girl, because looking at her face usually relieves stress. The girl laughed and said she was joking, and knew how Baek Yusul would behave, so she prepared a compensation for him. She had a story about the Phantom Tower number 7, and the hero knew about it, which surprised the girl because not many knew about it, because it is an abandoned building that has disappeared. There are many barriers that prevent people from even approaching the place where the tower used to be at this point. Baek Yusul interrupted her. He knew this information was essential, because it would strengthen the Flame's attachment to the male hero. Thus Flame's knowledge of this means that, in the novel, it was Isel who knew this, and she was supposed to give this information only to the game's main character. So Baek Yusul thought he was just a stranger and refused to listen, saying it was a terrible story and didn't sound interesting. Surprised, she said the story was not scary and would just tell it for free. At first he acted like he had to share the information, but then he changed his mind. Hazel desperately needed information, so she was persistent, and sincerely wanted to share her story with Baek Yusul. Then their boyfriend agreed, and advised her to meditate into the abyss of her humanitarian studies. The girl was surprised by the study of the divine moon and meditation, so she assumed that the boy was engaged in cultivation. He didn't know how to tell her, but he said that her teacher was a bishop like Hazel, and through meditation she had increased her magical power. At that time, the importance of meditation was not yet known, so Hazel's reaction was natural. However, after a very short time, most priests began to meditate for several hours a day. In this sense, meditation was an essential course for priests. Usually Baek Yusul doesn't say that to anyone, but she's an exception because she's nice, which surprised her after all. A minute ago he said something completely different. Although this subject will not help her grades, she signs up for it anyway, thanks the guy for his advice and goes about her business. As he watched her go, Baek Yusul thought about how his advice could change Yusul's future. But if he leaves her because of fear, and she has a terrible ending to her life, it would be good if meditation could help her. These reflections made him realize he was also a magician, and why he hadn't thought about training in meditation. Baek Yusul diligently trains his body in the game, by awakening magical body fortification and growing very strong and fast. In the game you could gain experience with one button. Now he can do it directly because it's been quiet lately anyway. And Baek Yusul hasn't been able to gain experience. Estella Academy. All students lived in a dormitory and were divided into classes, from F to S. This system of dormitories was like a set room for the players, but for the boy, it became his only home because his hometown was burned down. Classes F and S were similar, but S had a separate room on the top floor, while Faye had 4 and the others had 3 and 2 people. Although Baek Yusul was a bit lonely, he could finally use his loneliness to his advantage, and for the right purpose, so he decided to meditate. His goal was not statistics, but he needed to get used to this body since this was reality. In the game Baek Yusul was a genius. He was able to manifest the sword's aura, using the fact that mana circulates endlessly in and out of it. No one paid attention to him, so no one knew that Baek Yusul was a genius swordsman, the only one in this world who had reached the pinnacle of skill. His breathing controls mana flow through his body, so if you increase the amount of mana with each breath, you can get more at once. Skills are not acquired through experience alone. They need to be used, which means that all you need to do is train. Even after skipping dinner, the hero closed his eyes and focused on meditation. When the sun began to rise, He opened his eyes and felt new changes. The player realized that these are the feelings. The character felt as if he had a syndrome since childhood, which was part of his weak but sensitive sense. The system notified him that the mana flow and flicker skill levels had increased. This motivated Baek's soul even more. So with an inspired mood, he saw the chance that he would get the true ending. Practical classes began at the Magic Academy, and there were many of them. Still, students were looking forward to these classes. Classes are held in the dome, pocket dimension, that allows you to freely control the size of the place, with its features all sporting events. Other types of events, dungeon gates and monster training are held here. There are 141 people in Class A, 50 students and 41 in Class S. If it were like in the novel, there would be 39 students in Class S. Flame expected 40 including her. But another student was added to the group, and she doesn't know where Baek Useful came from. In the original version, the total number of freshmen was 1,140, but after the addition of the new students, it became 1,141. In other words, he was in the novel, and Flame wants to find out, because she is the only one in the world who knows its plot. Her thoughts were interrupted by the crowd that had gathered around Prince Jeremy. Everyone wanted to be close to him. And he was also a kind of genius. He was a handsome man in perfect shape. He was tall, with a warm personality and a smile that never left his lips. In the original story, he was obsessed with Isel. Still, he was abandoned without being loved. So he became a villain, however. All of these were carefully calculated actions to manage his own image, and Flame thought it best not to get too close to him. When she looked at him intently, Jeremy turned his head to meet her gaze, with a slightly surprised expression, and waved his hand in her direction. He was terribly handsome. Flame quickly dodged his gaze, but the feeling after this brief eye contact did not go unnoticed. Then she turned around and walked in the other direction, wanting to collect her thoughts and get ready. The noise of the heated chatter stopped all at once. Lee Hanwell began the lesson, and emphasized that training was needed before the class. This should show the level of skill needed to teach each one properly. But if someone does not like it, it is not the teacher's problem. Professors can subtract and add points to students. If they score less than a certain number of points, they can expel the student. The training will take place in a dungeon, and there will be situations in real dungeons, monsters and traps to test everyone. 4 points for a level 1 monster. 8 for a level 2 monster, and 20 points if you get a pointer. The 5 best students will receive small gifts, and those who fail will have their points deducted. You can also form teams, but the points will be distributed. Before disappearing from the dome, Professor Lee Hanwall also said that if you destroy another student, you can take away all their points. When these words were spoken and the teacher disappeared, the ground began to shake and deform, frightening the students. The floor, which rose high enough to reach the clouds, became a bean tree, and green branches and leaves blossomed everywhere. So the training started, and all the students stood there in awe and thought about their plan of action for the training. Flame was also a little surprised, but there was time to think about it. As she was about to leave, someone called out to her, which confused her a little. It was Jackie. She wanted to ask if Flame would be alone on the practical assignment, and if she wanted to form a team with her and the others. Although there are many advantages to forming a team while practicing in the dungeon, it was better to try this time alone. So she politely declined Jackie's request. The girl agreed, because you have to share the points with your teammates. Flame agreed, but thought Daiki was sarcastic. After agreeing to assemble a team for the next time, they went their separate ways. As Flame walked away, she looked back at Jackie, and thought that she felt like she was following Flame, but maybe it was just a phrase. An hour later, Flame was actively and quite efficiently destroying the monster, and was already wondering when this practical task would end. After destroying another monster, and thinking of a further plan of action, Ivy suddenly attacked her, who was trapped in a trap, but she easily deflected the attacker's attack, and using an attack spell, calmly destroyed the Ivy trap. Not only monsters but even floor attacks, as expected from Stella's Academy. Even the dungeon practice should not be underestimated. At the moment, Flame has scored 18 points, which is not a bad option, but it can all be covered with one wand. So it was worth moving on. As she was walking, she noticed something and thought it was a monster, but after looking more closely, she realized it was a person. But how can a student hide his presence to such an extent? Flame also hides his presence by using the spell of blending in with nature. Flame's ability to link damage, defense and healing is a good choice for ambushing the enemy. While preparing to attack, she noticed that this student was Baek-Yusol alone without a team. She was surprised he was alone. However, she remembered that students wanted to create a faction of Baek-Yusol and he rejected them all. Looking at Baek-Yusol again, she noticed that he already had one wand, which was the perfect chance to attack and test him. A yellow-colored magic circle lit up at the end of Flame's stick. She used the magic skill very aggressively, calling it the Ball of Light. The distance was 15 meters, at which point he would not have been able to use defensive equipment, suffered great damage and been eliminated. Meanwhile, Baek-Yusol turned his head sharply to meet Flame's gaze. As soon as the magic was applied, before she could finish her sentence, his figure disappeared like a mirage using the flicker, and before that, his sixth sense. The ball of light crashed into the miserable tree and disappeared, and Flame sank to the floor with a frozen face. No trace of Baek-Yusol's presence was left. Meanwhile, as soon as Baek-Yusol felt something similar to attacking magic heading toward him, he activated Flicker and teleported to the top of the tree. He was surprised that she wanted to destroy him using such magic. He was lucky that the level of the syndrome was higher, otherwise he would have been in trouble. He only has 2 flickers left, so if he uses terrain he can handle it, but he had better watch out for her. Having gone very far, he thought everything should be fine because he shouldn't take risks, because his goal was 5th place. 5th place can be earned by the root of Adelica, which when consumed, increases endurance and muscle strength to a certain level. The main characters will still take the first 4 places, so they need 3 more sticks in the state. Walking away absorbed in his thoughts, the hero did not notice how he was met by an aggressive group of students. A guy named Raiden was quite famous at school. He belonged to the faction of Juzlek, who was Jeremy's lackey. They were members of a faction created by a member of another faction. Baek-Yusol was amazed because Raiden held 3 sticks in his hand. Raiden couldn't believe that Baek-Yusol had answered the 3 strange questions correctly and had been admitted to Class S recently. Stella has also been accepting newcomers. The boys felt superior because they knew that he did not know how to use magic. Since they had already met, why shouldn't he give them his pointer? The students reproached the guy because what would he do to them? He didn't even get his middle-class cane. First-class flicker is effective against the weak, but it's unlikely to work on a talented mage from a prestigious family like Raiden. But still, Baek-Yusol had another option: the pointer in his hand and the fact that this place was a dungeon. When the boy held out his wand, Raiden approached with a haughty expression. Raiden took it as a sign of surrender. The silhouette melted into the air, leaving only the sound of the fluttering robe. Raiden looked at Baek-Yusol's face in surprise, and put his hand to his head. Raiden was distracted from contemplating the huge blow. The magic shield he always wore around his body shattered into pieces, and shock overwhelmed his mind. At this point, Raiden instinctively reacted by spreading mana around him to try to repel the attack. As the attacker disappeared, a wave of mana only sliced through the air, but Raiden snapped out of his daze and realized that one of the wands in his hand had been stolen. It was dangerous, but he was able to put his plan into action and show the students that he had the stick. These sticks were really effective because they are a bug. Due to their great strength, they allow you to destroy magic, and they have the power of most magic items. Although they help mages more, they can be very effective for Baek-Yusol, who fights physically and has a weapon with a strong attacking ability. The students led by Raiden were about to attack again and prepared their wands, but their plans were interrupted by the trap they fell into. Taking advantage of the situation, the boy successfully hid from the attackers and ran behind their backs. 2 guys noticed him and attacked him with water balloons, thinking that he would not be able to move falling from the air. Baek-Yusol, possessing the enhanced 6th sense granted by the Monosaurus, not only freely avoided traps, but also flexibly used them as a shield. Thanks to his many years of experience in duels, he made excellent use of the terrain. The guys were nervous, but Raiden was getting them drunk and preparing them to attack. As soon as they saw Baek-Yusol, and be careful not to have a magic bounce. After shortening the distance, Bekasol teleported directly to one of the boys and attacked him with his wands. One of the students was standing behind him, and being frightened by Bekasol, he interrupted the spell and created a magical bounce. Taking advantage of the boy's disorientation, the guy quickly stole the chopsticks from Raiden's hands. Bekasol stood there and bragged about stealing the chopsticks, thinking he would give them to her if he ever got a girlfriend. He thanked them for the fight because it was interesting, and left them one because it would be unpleasant to take everything away. Princess Hong Bian quietly watched the whole skirmish between the group of students. LED by Raiden and Bekasol from a hiding place. Meanwhile Bekasol was walking and thinking that if he had fought, usually he would have been robbed. But because it was a dungeon, he could steal the wands as he was about to climb a tree. His sixth sense warned him of an eerie sensation, that something was coming at him. Turning his head, he noticed that a huge fireball flew right over the place where he landed. Using flicker, he moved forward sharply, and soon flames erupted in tongues of fire where he had been about to land. A second before the explosion was equal to the force of a small bomb. The area where the explosion took place was almost empty. Even on the muddy ground, the sound of Beck's shoes heels was distinctly heard. Yusaw patted himself on the head, stood up and looked around. Hong Bianc slowly approached the boy and asked him why he hadn't taken the last wand from a group of students. The guy was surprised by her appearance, but told her she had misunderstood something, that he couldn't take the stick away and that she didn't care. The princess simply stopped and remained silent, looking at the hero with a blank stare. Then, Bekasol realized that she was waiting for him to deal with them, and that she would take all the sticks away, and they wondered how she could do that. She thought again and not finding a better answer, said she was of royal blood and challenged him to a duel. Yes, I take the latter from a commoner, which would be unworthy behavior for a princess, who is supposed to take them by winning a duel. Bekasol objected to her, because it was not worth insulting the weak, to which she said she had seen him play with that group. From the beginning, the princess remembered being in a hurry, because she didn't want her mother to scold her again. So she had to get more points as quickly as possible. But as she walked away, she heard someone's voice and hiding, realized that someone was fighting with each other, also noticed Bekasol in the battle, and wondered whether she should attack. Still, it would be challenging to deal with 6 opponents alone, so the best thing to do was to wait until the end of the battle, and easily take the wand. But her thoughts were confused by the fact that Bekasol had defeated the opponents. She was surprised he didn't use any other spells besides flickering, as if he was playing and mocking them. Although the group of boys was weaker than Hong Bian, they still grew up among the elite. But Bekasol is just a commoner who plays with them. Like that, this motivated her to use all her strength to destroy him, as a commoner could not be that strong. The sparks from her body began to fly in all directions, connecting the trees to each other, and waves of flame danced and swirled around the trees. The guy skillfully took advantage of the flicker, and managed to dodge the crazy dance of the flames. As expected from a princess, it was terrifying. Good that Bekasol had strengthened the sixth sense skill in advance. It's hard to dodge with just 2 jumps, so you need to find another way out. The princess wondered why Bekasol did not take out his magic wand, since all students were given a simple wand upon admission. But since he doesn't know how to use magic, he doesn't even need the wand, so he simply forgets about it and its existence. Looking at him, Hong Bian thought he was just laughing at her and angry at this, told him to put in the work. Although the boy didn't know how to use magic, he was doing his best, so the princess began her attack. A flurry of flames shaped like a flower rose high into the sky, wriggling and hissing like a snake, trying to paint everything with its venom. Hong Bian was determined to destroy Bekasol, so she used all her strength to the maximum. The idea was to take advantage of the enemy's distraction. By drawing his attention to the lure, Bekasol barely dodged the mass of flames that almost showered him with fiery kisses, but teleported away from the large column of fire that rose from below. So he thought he couldn't dodge jumps forever, because the area of attack was so vast. Every second fire attacks flew at him, although his experience level was low. Now the attacks could be detected only with the sixth sense. Succeeding waves of attacks hit the miserable air, as the man dashed behind a rock, deflecting all the flying fiery arrows. He was lucky this time, But even if Bak Yusol gets closer to Hong Bayang, she will immediately work her magic. He understood this perfectly well, because he had previously lost in duels to fire mages. Still then he was playing with a mouse and keyboard, and now he was in reality. Since the princess was much stronger than she seemed, she fought in the open from Baek Yusol and no wet spot was left. It was hard to even call it a fight. But Baek Yusol was determined and would not sit idly by. Thanks to his sixth sense, he rushed into the attack as if running between arrows, trying to get closer to the princess. Using the pointers in his hands, he could even deflect several fire arrows, flying at him at breakneck speed. Hong Bian was very surprised that he was able to deflect several arrows. She had never seen anything like it, and she simply could not believe her eyes. Meanwhile, Baek Yusol's consciousness changed over time. He felt the flow of mana fully and his sixth sense, like sight or hearing, became normal. Hong Bian was concerned, because it was a wild area filled with vegetation, which should have been an advantage for her, as a mage with the attribute of flame. So she had no choice but to use her magic even more, and after recovering from the shock, she began to attack more actively. Noticing that Hong Bayang is confused, he has to pierce her magic shield with the pointers. At this unexpected moment, he activated Flicker and appeared in front of Hong Bayang. For a moment, their eyes met and the girl began to recite an eruption spell. This skill protected a mage with a fiery attribute from the enemy. Still Baek Yusol easily coped with it because he had often encountered it before. Just one step back, he was exactly 2 meters away from Hong Bian. As soon as the explosion sounded, the guy approached her without wasting a second. So he took out the pointer and was able to strike, after which the careless magic shield broke, throwing her body back from the impact. Baek Yusol was the first to speak, boasting of his victory. When the girl asked him who he was, he said he was just an ordinary student looking to the side. The guy said he had noticed her long ago and let Flame come out of hiding. When Hong Byong turned her head in surprise, a black-haired girl jumped out from behind the rock, and the princess still had a displeased expression. Flame came out of hiding, although she said she wasn't even hiding. She was more interested in how Baek Yusol realized she was there. The guy justified himself by saying it was just intuition, but he knew it was his sixth sense from the mana leakage syndrome. Then she asked him how he knew he could pierce the shield with a training device, like a pointer. There was no such moment in the original novel, and it will be impossible to explain it, simply because Flame will not understand. He said that the pointers were quite strong, but the girl objected that pointers have their limits, and he decided that they could be used to pierce the shield. Baek Yusol had seemed strange to Flame before, but now after what she saw, she asked who this Baek Yusol was. Hong Byong was very surprised by all this dialogue. She still hadn't accepted defeat, but kept quiet and waited for the outcome. It all ended less than a month after. The guy decided to give up his loud statements. He was asked whether he should tell her the truth, but it was inappropriate, so he refused, saying that he did not wish her harm and wanted to help her. Taking advantage of the disoriented girl's moment, he quickly turned around. He excused himself, saying he hadn't had enough time to say goodbye. But before he could, something hit him on the back of the head. A dizzying sensation brought tears to his eyes, and the 4 wands fell belatedly to the ground. Looking back at Hong Byong, she was surprised that the wands were missed. She said he had avoided the magic of traps and blind spots, and could not see the pointers. Nothing should be done about it, because the sixth sense has limitations. After all, the skill depends on Baek Yusol's mental strength, and his strength has just run out. So the guy asked her why she threw the pointers at him, and she replied that she had lost, so they were rightfully his. He thought that maybe pride was playing tricks on him, but he didn't need so much, because his position in the rankings would rise, and he wouldn't need other prizes. Taking only 1 wand, he quickly walked away, wondering how Hong Beyonce and Flame looked at him from behind, because men are cool when they don't look back. On the contrary, the girls thought that he was probably stupid and, like all commoners, was not distinguished by his prudence. 12 professors and lecturers, including Li Hanwal, stood looking at a hologram map levitating in the air. There were 141 red dots on the map, indicating students with grades A, Every year at least one outstanding student enters the academy. Still, this year was particularly noteworthy, because we had to follow not one or two students. Telix from the Council of Elders and Urena Ion, a member of the Board of Directors of the Blue Tower of Magic, came to see it. Lee Hanwal was surprised that such high-profile people came, but he was sure all the professors were watching. One of the teachers interrupted his thoughts, because not even a few minutes after the training started, the two best candidates had already made contact. They were He-won, Ryung and Mayu Song, but after a short time, the duel began immediately and he won. Ryung was already attacking with strong magic on the screen. Mayu Sun circulated mana on his toes and rushed towards. He won Ryung using hyper jump. Not just one but three at once. The average age reaches the third rank by 30, while Mason can use it at 17. No one could believe. The guys were using 3 elements of magic at once. Most magicians have only one element available, and it takes a long time to master at least 2. True talent is defined by mastery of 3 or more elements. They both have had talent since childhood. Still, then something interrupted the professor's thoughts and surprised him. Suddenly a giant demon burst into the sky. It was a hidden boss event prepared by the professors as a joke, and there was no reward. A girl appeared on the body of a strange bird with no signs of life and frozen wings, and sparks flew all over her body. It was Izel. Hidden bosses have never been found by accident. You need insight, common sense, prudence, and the ability to think. The eldest daughter of the Grand Duke Morpheus the traitor. If her father had not been so, her talent would have blossomed even more, and high-ranking mages would have started talking here. Li Hanwal switched to the screen, where the princess of the kingdom of Adelbe, Hong Bian, was fighting with an unknown student while complaining. The elders focused on the screen, and were very surprised to see Flicker's magical skill. They also saw an unusual disciple. Flicker is a spell many wizards have tried to cast, but failed because it is impossible to control. But there is a student who can completely subdue and control the spell, as if the Flicker were part of him. Li Hanwal explained that this student's name is Baek Yusul. He is a unique student who uses Flicker as a specialization. Then one of the elders wondered why he didn't use other types of magic, so he could have easily won a long time ago. When everyone asked the same question, there was a sudden crack and a man's voice interrupted, saying it was a serious match. Li Han-woo's heart skipped a beat and almost fell. The very familiar yet unfamiliar voice was Eltman. Eltman, the great sage of the 9th grade. He said that the way he fought reminded him of the code of honor that existed in ancient times. Eltman mumbled as if talking to himself, but the mages were stunned by these words. For in the age of magic, chivalry disappeared along with cold steel. Li Hanwal mentioned that the code of honor is the way of thinking of knights who wielded swords despite living in the world of magic, the essence of the heroes who have been protecting the world from evil since time immemorial, is that, as they say, they always went to battle with evil only with a sword in their hands. It's still a good idea to take up arms when there is magic, but this student uses a pointer as a sword. But if the great sage considers it right, the elders have no choice but to accept it. The first training session in the dungeon was already over. Despite his second place won, Reen felt defeated and immediately went to the S-class training ground. Of 141 students, 39 failed to pass, and Ma Yusong took only 6th place. He was very sorry that Azel had interrupted his fight with Ma Yusong. If he had had a little more time, he would have won. It has always been the case that Ma Yuzhen does not take everything seriously and still achieves high results in whatever he does. Even in the practical task, he Wang Yuan placed magic circles all over the territory and carefully analyzed his actions. Mayasong easily accepted his attacks. He was very concerned about whether there was no way he could beat Mayasong, or whether the difference in their talents was so significant. From the very beginning, magical skills sparkled one after another, and the Scarecrow did not even have time to activate its protective abilities, and was bombed beyond recognition. At that moment, Hong Biang came in and was surprised that it was He Wan Riang, who was usually as calm and angry as ever. Hong Biang frantically cast the magic of the flame attribute. He hit the effigy with all her might, because she was angry at her defeat. Even though she lost 1 point, she took 3rd place. Her mother seems to be happy, but if she hadn't won she would have been punished. Seeing Princess He Wan Riang, it seemed to Wan Riang that her magic had become stronger and more precise. Her fire magic is potent and must be challenging to control. So the guy was surprised that she had advanced so much in such a short time. Reluctantly, the girl admitted that her classes with Baek Yusol helped her learn to solve difficult questions and develop her magical abilities. A simple plebeian with terrible grades and character, but the only one who knows how to deal with the princess's weaknesses, is Hong Byong's opinion of Baek Yusol. Then Tae Rin interrupted her train of thought and said the stick she had ordered to be forged had already arrived. So after informing the princess, her protector wanted to go immediately to see Baek Yusol, but Hong Byong grabbed her shoulder and stopped her. She decided to give the wand to Baek Yusol, so she came to the second tower, where the laboratories and faculty chairs were located. Knowing he was there, she is tormented by remorse. She could have passed the stick to someone else, because everyone might think she is running after a commoner. While she was doubting her choice, someone called out to her, which slightly disoriented the princess. Hearing a familiar voice, Hong Byong smiled and looked up. It was her mentor Hammerl. She apologized for calling her a mentor, because she had recently become a professor. Still, Hamar did not notice, saying the princess had significantly matured. But the professor wondered what the girl was doing here, and Hong Byong said she had just had some business and would be leaving. Also, the mentor said that some critical people in the world of magic had arrived and were making a fuss about a student named Baek Yusol. But Hammerl was sure the princess already knew, because they had a duel and the student did not use magic. The girl was embarrassed that her mentor had seen the fight and felt sorry for showing such a poor performance to a person she respected. Noticing the girl's excitement, Hammerl supported her by saying that he fought to the best of his ability, even though he didn't use magic as his credo. After watching their fight, the academy director said he saw it as an attempt to restore the code of honor that disappeared many years ago. She was surprised and shouted that she could not believe the guy wanted to return. The knighthood, it sounded doubtful. However, when she remembered the fight, she realized that he was using a pointer as a sword, so that's why Baek Yusol wanted a magic sword. Only giving up magic at the magical academy would be an obstacle. The professor agreed with this, but said he chose this path himself. Despite this, the princess was all-inspiring by Baek Yusol's continued push to improve, even after reaching a high level of skill. When the sun began to set, she stood still for a long time, as if nailed to the spot, and thought about Baek Yusol's credo. If he had told anyone he wanted to become a knight, they would have laughed at him, but Baek Yusol sincerely wanted to become one. During the battle, she was angry and thought he was mocking her. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice Baek Yusol coming up and eating Ethel's roots. He said hello to Hong Byong and asked her what she was doing here. She said she was obviously not there because of him, which made the guy laugh, embarrassed and blushing. She handed back Yusol Teravian and mumbled something under her breath, clearly embarrassed by the moment. Opening the box as expected from the Adalabites, the craftsmanship is unmatched by anyone else, and it was good that he helped the princess. Hong Byong also allowed Baek Yusol, who was already considering selling the box, to keep the box. However, she couldn't help wondering if the boy was really not going to use magic still. She immediately became embarrassed and left him without saying goodbye, having no choice but to leave. He was interested in the girl's words, because Professor Lee Hanwal had told him something similar. He seems to support the guy's intentions and respect his credo, but with this magic sword, he will be safe enough in the next episode. So we had to try the new sword in action. So it was sold to a special training ground for the S-class. Simply by channeling his mana into the stick, he made it take on the shape of a sword and gleamed with a white, mesmerizing glow. If Flame took it, it would be cool because she was a human who had the magic of elves, dwarves, and angels, which made her unique. This wand constantly absorbs the wielder's mana, so not everyone can use it still. Flame maintains its mana with the energy of nature. Although Bak Yusuf constantly absorbs mana, it does not accumulate in his body. In other words, the concentration of mana in his breath becomes the source of Teravon. Thanks to the 5th place prize in the practical training, his strength has improved a bit, so he should start training. Since he now has a weapon, he can directly raise his characteristics without spending experience points. So he will have little free time after a while. The day came for the compulsory defense against magic class, taught by Varian, a defense against magic class lecturer. The lecturer said that the students would start practicing real magic from now on. So he divided everyone into teams and told them to get their wands. Varian was glad that there were many tantalizing students in this group, so he divided them by level. However, he notices Bikayasol and remembers his achievements in his head. He was not happy for the guy, but rather hated him when the lecturer approached him. He asked why he was doing nothing. He said that he was studying another defense technique, so he had nothing to learn about basic magic. Varian was curious because being corrupt and sycophantic to children from wealthy families, he considered it impudence. He had heard that Bekyu-Sol could not use magic other than flicker, which had deprived the lecturer of his. In this case, he asked me to demonstrate this superb defense technique to the rest of the students. To stay in this academy, an ordinary lecturer needs connections. So Varian asked to be an opponent of the guy, Morso Dordan from the Empire. If he beat an S-class student, it would only be to his advantage. So regardless of Bekyu-Sol's opinion, they were asked to come on the platform. Once on the platform, the boys waited for the lecturer to command Morso to attack Bekyu-Sol. Morso Dordan was also in the Uslek faction with Raiden, so the guy supported and shouted threats at Bekyu-Sol. Perhaps it was for the best, Bekyu-Sol thought, because he had to take this class because it was compulsory, and he had nothing to do there. Varian has been known for his bad temper since the first one, but at least this way the guy can see the results of his training. So the lecturer emphasized the rules of dueling. One attacks and the other defends. Then it is forbidden to change and use magic in the wrong turn. The duel will begin when Varian says and Morso will start first. Hence the students begin to worry about Bekyu-Sol, because Morso has the attribute of earth. Soon the lecturer ordered me to start. Morso decided to use second-rank magic, even though only first-rank magic is allowed. In an introductory magic workshop, Morso used the spell Chopping Boulder with evil intentions, and thinking that he might be able to destroy Bekyu-Sol. Without much effort, Bekyu-Sol simply slashed the spell flying at him, surprising everyone. Especially Morso, even Varian couldn't believe his eyes. The magic would not have disappeared from such an attempt, but Bekyu-Sol undoubtedly dispelled the spell. All spells follow the path of mana. That is, if you dissipate mana, the magic will be dissipated. Bekyu-Sol was enjoying the moment. He had trained all these days without rest, and now he could barely dispel a third-rank spell. Morso was very angry because how dare he touch his magic, and Varian thought that he could not lose, because he would be in trouble. So he said that he has a good technique, but there is clearly a limit to how many spells he can cast. If his opponent becomes more aggressive, understanding the lecturer's hint, Morso immediately recited a more serious spell, and directed it at Bekyu-Sol. It looked like he was going to cripple him so severely that it was too much. The students wondered why the professor didn't stop the duel, but in a flash, a flurry of small boulders flew like rain into Bekyu-Sol, and Varian stood there in awe. Quickly analyzing the situation, Bekyu-Sol calculated that 11 boulders would come at him. If he didn't use flicker, he has only one way to block them, which he successfully did, which made his opponent very angry. Morso went too far. It was obvious that the magic skills he used were at a higher level than those of a magician in the first grade of high school. Morso's fruitless attack irritated the lecturer, because Varian would be in trouble if he lost. Meanwhile, Bekyu-Sol was surprised that he had just repeated the fan technique from a different game. The disadvantage of the fan was that it required several times more mental effort to keep Van in shape, and frequent breathing. In addition, its defense was weaker than other skills that block single but powerful magic attacks. So it's good that it's just a duel. The students around me began to say that it was an amazing technique that no one had seen in textbooks. How many people in the world could perform such sword stunts? As Morso prepared his next attack, he was furious. He could not bear to see a commoner disgrace him in front of everyone. The students noticed this and became worried about Bekyu-Sol again. Still, only Varian was happy about it, because he was the one who was in danger. When Varian still did not stop fighting, someone came out of the room and addressed him with these words. The student stepped aside to make way for the voice owner. Prince Jeremy Scalbin had been calmly watching from the back, but then he came over and asked why the professor was not finishing the fight. Seeing his smiling face, Varian, like Morso, turned pale. But the prince asked another question. Why did he not let Baek Yusol attack? Morso's behavior was unsuitable for a freshman fight, and his opponent could have been seriously injured. If he had made a mistake, the students were outraged. Varian was so focused on the duel that he did not notice the students' reaction, who were ready to fight for their rights. Thus the initiative passed to Baek Yusol, who did not swing his sword quickly, and the magic shield shattered, ending the friendly duel. Prince Jeremy watched the events, and was somewhat happy that Baek Yusol won, because he had not expected it. Later, in the volunteer room, Jeremy gave Morso a preventive talk, and fainted from the number of blows. Next to them stood a girl named Virajan, whom Jeremy asked to look after his friend after the conversation, because it would be a shame if something went wrong. In the Scalvan Empire, where the heir is determined solely by magical abilities, Prince Jeremy Scalvan outran his brothers at 12. The very fact that Morso is no longer a loyal subject means that the Dordogne is excluded from the Empire's political world. Not only Morso, Baek Yusol had also caught the attention of Prince Jeremy, and would no longer be able to live in peace. Virajan thought the next day, the student group in which Flame was present was preparing for a new alchemy lesson. After the demonstration of Baek Yusol's defense techniques, two rumors spread through the school. The first of which was the rumor of Baek Yusol's knighthood. The second was that he defeated Morso Dordogne. But Flame was annoyed by the gossip, because everyone was talking about him. Not that she was looking for attention, but she didn't like it. Flame looked up an alchemy professor. Myson Turin clapped his hands to get the students' attention. She started the lesson with the basics. Alchemy requires precise measurements and accuracy, like temperature control today. The professor emphasized that the students will prepare the Turin fatigue recovery potion she developed. It was a bit complicated for Flame, but if you do everything they say, you'll be fine in alchemy class. Alchemy is a very precise science, so Flame tries to avoid it. She is also very distracted by what is happening in front of her. Mason Tyron yelled at her assistant, Altalisa, for getting too close to a dangerous ingredient. However, Professor Mason Tyron was destined to become a dark demon later on, so she had no choice but to take an alchemy class to prevent. Remembering that Baek Yusol was also in the class, she wanted to see what he was doing, because she thought he was there to get closer to Azel. But Baek Yusol seemed oblivious to Azel's presence. Utterly engrossed in alchemy, Flame thought he was a pervert when she noticed how much he enjoyed it. Since Flame had good dexterity and concentration, she quickly made the Tyrant Fatigue Restoration Potion, as instructed by Mizzen Tyrant. Flame looked at Azel. She was fine and everything looked normal. But Azel had made a potion to restore Tyrant's fatigue just like Flame. While working on the original, she accidentally acquires Mala's notes on magical techniques from an old bookstore. Oddly enough, a detailed alchemical formula was written down in them. Following this, she accidentally created an anti-fatigue remedy, superior to the Tyrant Fatigue Restoration Potion. Her embarrassment was interrupted by Meizen, who told Baek Yusol off for changing the ingredients, to which he replied that it was more effective. But it wasn't the Tyrant Fatigue Potion he'd been told to make. And then Flame realized that he'd made the potion Azel was supposed to make. The woman told Baek Yusol that he did not even listen to her, which is why commoners are simply not suitable for them. In the novel, this phrase is, "That's why your family is in decline," and it is directed to Yusol. These words hurt her, and she was not herself until she finished the potion. What if Baek Yusol knew about this, and deliberately got in front of Professor Meizen to shield Isol from it? Flame thought, the professor has a lot of influence in Stella's academy. If you dislike her even once, you can feel the consequences in your grades, even in other classes. Meanwhile, the professor yelled at Baek Yusol for his manner of communication, and said she would call his parents, to which he replied that he was an orphan. The alchemy was so interesting that Baek Yusol got too carried away, and completely forgot about the unpleasant development. Whatever Myson said had nothing to do with Baek Yusol. He thought maybe tomorrow he could make a decoction of Coca-Cola and kimchi for lunch. Time passed unnoticed, and a few weeks later, Baek Yusol changed the professor's recipe again, using the wrong materials to improve the results. They were arguing again, so Baek Yusol decided to check her with his glasses, and saw that the progression of dark magic infection was already 21%. It was the beginning of the 8th episode of the game, in which Mai-sin could not overcome her negative emotions, and went through a dark demonization, becoming one of the villains. As soon as the influence of the dark demon reaches 90%, it will become a monster still, until the progress reaches 50%. Magic cannot detect it now. Baek Yusol will not prove that she is an accomplice of darkness, so you need to provoke her. And when the progress is more than 50%, lay out the demon killers. Usually, a demon's blackening can be removed before I'm thoroughly demonized. Still, Mason is a demon contractor, which means she joined the alliance of her own free will. The 4th episode hasn't even started, and there's already a strong boss. If you don't take action, she'll turn the other students into demons. Baek Yusol's behavior irritated Mason, so he can't expect good grades in this subject. The boy thought that the more attention you pay to Baek Yusol, the less others will get hurt, and the better it is to work on your body instead of your lessons. However, his joy ended when the practical exam, which was a group project, came. The group consisted of 4 students, and looking at Baek Yusol's group, one might think they were mourning. But Baek Yusol decided to get to know everyone. After he introduced himself, the others introduced themselves, Kasahun Mal, Lebanon and Isel, but this did not encourage the group. It seemed to make it worse. One of the boys said that Professor Mazen gives bad grades to all the students she doesn't like. But Azel interrupted him and said there was no reason to give up. At least 3 alchemists from the Castle of Alchemy conduct the practical exam, which means that the professor cannot influence their performance. Alone Azel's words encouraged the students, so they promised to try their best and successfully complete the task. However, thanks to their shared knowledge, making a potion of power D will not be a problem for them, but they need to gather the best ingredients. The main ingredient in collecting is the tail of the fire lizard, so he needs to carefully select the ingredient so that it is fresh. Meanwhile, Professor Mycentyron called one of the students and asked him to send this note to the first year students of Group C Alchemy. However, the exception should be the 12th group in which Baek Yusol is located, because they do not need to know this information. The practical exam in alchemy is conducted by officials from the Castle of Alchemy. If Baek Yusol shows a miserable result, he will not become an alchemist. In the S classroom where Flame usually trains, a boy suddenly approached her and handed her a note from her professor. A note from Professor of Alchemy. Mai-sin warned me not to tell anyone about this note, and that she should understand. The note said that the practical task had been changed from the Potion of Vitality to the Potion of Tyrant's Instruction. So if Baek Yusol knows the novel's plot, he will prepare for the incident and bring the scales of a metallic spider instead of the tail of a fire lizard. This is how Flame got a chance to test Baek Yusol on his knowledge of the original novel's plot. The following weekend, using the portal, after Baek Yusol got a headache, he arrived at the day rival stadium. Then someone began to speak in front of him. It was a guide who greeted Baek Yusol and called him a magician. It was confusing for the guy because he was just a student. Still, the guide said that the students of the Stell Academy deserve to be treated as full-fledged magicians. Passers-by were interested in him because Stella's school uniform was designed so everyone could recognize her. He gave away Stella's identity as a cadet. Thanks to Stella's watch, it was possible to use portals that usually cost 100,000 credits. For free, the hero left the stadium and headed towards the swamp. Looking for his target, he knew that fire lizards must live there. The fire lizard's endurance and strength are higher than those of local animals, and to defeat it, you need second-rank magic due to its high resistance and mobility. Before that, Baek Yusol had already tried his hand at monsters with the first security level, and it was just a matter of time before he could also handle the second level. Thanks to his sixth sense, he knew that a fire lizard was already nearby, and knew where it would attack from. Due to their mobility, lizards immediately rush at the enemy. She quickly approached Baek Yusol, but he was faster and destroyed her with one blow. However, lizards move in groups, and in a second, other lizards come up, but for Baek Yusol this is only to his advantage, so he collects many ingredients for the next alchemy lesson. Everyone prepared their ingredients. Isabel looked around and said all the ingredients were fresh, and everything should go well. Now all they had to do was prepare the potion correctly. After motivating the whole group, they waited for the practical exam to begin. Suddenly the front door to the classroom opened, and 3 alchemists accompanied by Altalisi and Professor Mazentierin entered. She emphasized that it was time to start, and reminded us that the task of this exam was to prepare a potion, according to Tyron's instructions. For rank B, the 12th group was surprised, and Azel exclaimed that they thought they had to make a D rank life force potion. The professor said that she had sent out an alert that the exam topic had changed to a potion made according to Tyron's instructions. And looking around, Azel saw other ingredients. Beck-Uzel finally figured out how the professor wanted to punish the boy, although he didn't care. He would hate to see others get hurt because of him. Looking at him, Flame thought that he must have known about the events in the novel. But why did he fall into this trap? Since the 12th group prepared the wrong ingredients, they disregarded the code of alchemy, and the professor wanted to disqualify them. However, Beck-Yusup interrupted her, and said that he would prepare a potion, more effectively than necessary, as he had done before. The key ingredient in Tyron's potion is the scales of the italic spider, which have a wide variety of nutrients. Tyron potions are created by heat treatment with it as a base, so Beck-Usul plans to prepare a heat additive, using the tail of a fire lizard. Professor Maiden agreed to this, with the certainty that they would fail, and emphasized that they would be given only 1 hour. His group was worried they would fail, but they had no choice but to try. Beck-Usul encouraged the group, and lifted their spirits by asking them to trust him, and saying it was better to try than to be disqualified. The player recalls that alchemy was one of his main hobbies. In the game he wrote down every recipe, including one for a potion of Tyrant's rank B. Initially the boy did not plan to brew it, because Professor Mazen would invent the potion herself. The scales of italic spiders store so many nutrients that they need to hatch eggs, which makes them look like the tail of a fire lizard. It is said that the leaders of the Alger tribe, from the southern sands, eat them to improve their health and extend their life expectancy. Someone knew the Alker tribe's method of cultivation, and someone knew the manual process of drying. So they divided their duties and began to prepare the potion. Precisely an hour later, with the joint efforts of the two, the potion of Tyrant's B rank instruction was ready, which surprised the representatives from the alchemy castle. While one of the representatives evaluated the potion, the professor was furious, because she had been working on the formula for many years. The alchemist said that although there were a few too many ingredients, this potion was much better than, and more effective than Professor Maizen's. Professor Maizen bit her lower lip at these words, as if her invention was, at best, inferior to the potions prepared by the students. On the spot, she asked them to hand her the potion, and the alchemist dutifully handed it to Maizen, who had no choice but to adopt a bewildered expression. The potion undoubtedly contained a technique unique to Maizen, which involved extracting nutrients from the demon and replacing them with human life force. However, the professor still gives the grades, and can disqualify the 12th group for incorrect components. As the alchemist showered the group with favorable reviews, Maizen had to keep her mouth shut. So having bent down before the alchemist from the Castle of Alchemy, she had no choice but to give the points to the 12th team. The furious professor promised herself that she would take revenge on Becky's soul. So the progress of infecting Professor Mazentier and with dark magic increased after the exam. Flame practiced on the S-class training ground in the evening. She was exhausted and decided to finish her training, because although she was young in body, she was still middle-aged before she appeared in the novel. While Flame stood silently listening to the explosions, several students jumped out from behind her. One of them was crying and the others were comforting her. Arsuin was crying because the princess had beaten her in controlling magic, even though she had been practicing for years. Hearing this, Flame's expression changes, because Hongbyong's ability to control will grow as she moves into her second year. Something could have changed the future. At that moment someone made her realize her creativity. The suspect Beck you saw came to mind and accelerated her development somehow. Even the practical exam in alchemy went strangely well. Azel was supposed to invent the potion formula in the future, and Professor Mazen was to take it and complete it. How does Beck Uzel know a recipe that does not appear in the novel? He also seems to have been unaware that such an incident would occur. If he knows things from the future, but is unfamiliar with the novel's plot. He may have regressed rather than inhabited the character. Like Flame, it sounds logical that Baek Yusol is from the future. Maybe he remembers different things from there, but he doesn't necessarily have to know about small incidents. According to the novel, Ma Yuzhen once received an attempt to return to the past from an entity that had power during the 11th month of the Silver Age. Then Wan Ryong noticed the pensive girl and came over, interrupting her train of thought. Flame immediately asked him if he knew Baek Yusol. He didn't understand why she would want to know. He only knew that he was a strange student. The guy asked Flame if she was really interested in Baek Yusol. She said yes without hesitation, which tensed the guy up. So the girl thought that apparently Baek Yusol knew the novel's plot, and said that it would not work and she would not stand still. She said it was time to confess her feelings to him, so she got ready to leave immediately, and Wan Ryong's heart almost broke. Thanking him for listening to her, Flame quickly left the training ground and disappeared into the corridors of the academy. He said goodbye to Flame without understanding, and stood for a few more minutes, leaving the place with his head down. The next day Baek Yusol had some free time, so he sat in a cafe with a cup of hot coffee and lost his thoughts. The progress of the dark demon's influence on Maisontieren has reached 37%. Which means that the incident will occur within 3 months. The influence of a dark demon randomly touches one of the students, and there are 3 candidates, Jackie Ashwang and Wan Ryang. The worst-case scenario is Wan Ryang. Although this rarely happens in the game, you have to be especially careful with the demon's influence on him, because it can lead to a bad ending. When he left the cafe and walked slowly toward the training ground, Flame was sitting in the garden when he saw Baek Yusol. Got up and came over. She came close enough to wave her short black hair and asked him sternly who he was, because he hadn't answered about his identity last time. The hero thought about it again, but telling her who he was made sense, because she would be a reliable ally. Telling Flame the whole truth and getting information from her can really help you understand this. Before he could say a word, a warning appeared in front of him, that he could not disclose the fact of his transfer to a key character. So Baek Yusol said they both have secrets they shouldn't reveal, so they should only discuss it superficially. Then the girl was the first to ask if the hero knew what would happen in the future. Although the guy said it on the surface, she decided if she asks him this, she will also know what the guy answered, and ask what she wants to study at this academy. Flame replied that she wanted to avoid a collapse, because this world is unstable, and asked why he behaved this way. Not knowing what to say, he thought it would be best for everyone, which would be enough, thinking it was a lie. Flame got angry, because he definitely had a purpose and had to benefit from it. Baek Yusol decided to correct her by saying that he didn't even know what he wanted. The only thing he needed was to survive. Then she looked up sharply and met Baek Yusol's teary-eyed gaze, which made his heart sink. He turned and ran away. Baek Yusol stood there in a daze because it was ridiculous, and at that moment Wan Ryang quickly approached him and asked why Flame ran away in tears. Ma Yusong's rival, the strongest man in the world, looked at me with such a cold stare that it would have been tough if there had been a misunderstanding. Mentioning that Wan Ryang suffers from unrequited love for Flame, Baek Yusol replied that there is nothing between them and never was, so he shouldn't worry. Blushing, Wan Ryang apologized and said goodbye to Baek Yusol, turning around and quickly leaving. It was a little confusing for him because in the original story, Wan Ryang was cool and calm, but now he shows such unstable behavior. In the evening, Hazel sat and tried to study some material, but she could not concentrate. She was troubled that, during the practical exam, she asked Baek Yusol if he had really devised the mixing method in a hurry. Then the guy thought about it and said that he had read a little bit about it in books, but he really came up with it on the spur of the moment. Hazel always considered herself a genius and thought that if she kept trying, she would soon surpass her teacher. She believed in it, but now she doubts herself because at this rate, she will never be able to avenge her father. The disgusting and vile Adalabites had made her father a traitor and executed him, so she needed to become stronger as soon as possible, she thought. So patting herself on the cheeks, she said she couldn't leave it like that and had to try harder. Then she practiced until late at night. Meanwhile, Flame was already in bed. She moved into the room because she liked the bustling life around her. As she lay there, she thought about Baek Yusol. because she thought he had no specific goal, which confirmed her guess that he had regressed. In the last part of the novel, the 11th month of the Silver Age told Mayusin that he could turn back time. However, the price will be the loss of memory. After the mission is completed, he will disappear and no one will even remember who saved the world. So the 11th moon asked him again if he would agree, because even his family would forget him. And Mayusin almost agreed, but Azel stopped him by saying that, rather than living in the world without him, she would rather die remembering him. Her words proved convincing, and Mayusin refused to regress. So in the epilogue the world was destroyed. If this world is really different from the novel's plot, Baek Yusol used the power of the 11th month to regress. Therefore, after the mission is completed, he will disappear and all traces of his activities and existence will be erased from this world. On the other hand, someone who has to lose most of his memory and is left with only one goal, to survive, said he just wants to survive. Suddenly, as if intending to interrupt Flame's thoughts, Jackie ran and said, "Hey." Juan Ryan had come to see her. Jackie told him that he was waiting on the first floor of the dormitory, to which Flame replied that she didn't care, and told him to say she was not there. Her friend wanted to argue and persuade the girl to leave, but she didn't care and went to sleep on the other side. With no other choice, Jackie threw on her cloak and ran to Hyun Riang, who was eagerly waiting for Flame. He didn't know the girl and asked who she was and where Flame was. Jackie said that Flame wasn't feeling well, so she went to bed early without even saying goodbye. The guy turned around and said he was leaving. He thought she was in a bad mood, because she had denied Baek Yusol's feelings. Jackie stood further away, because she was incredibly in love with Hae-won Ryung, and he couldn't even remember her name. It was always Flame's high abilities, and the attention of others that always went to Flame, and most painfully for Jackie, he won Ryan's heart the next day. The deputy director of the Stella Academy, 8th grade mage Akihaden, appeared before Professor Mizantiran. He said that a student had made a fool of her, and that she should understand perfectly well that a lot is expected of her also. I asked whether the research on the method of convergence of random sequences was progressing well, and the professor replied that she would not disappoint him here. So the deputy thanked the professor and escorted her to the door, thinking she did not realize she was being used, because her fame had blinded her. It's funny that Akihaden, a warrior of the world of magic who is supposed to fight demons, is conducting experiments for them. So she can't wait for her experiments to be over. Professor Mazentran, an assistant to Altalisai, was walking down the hallway carrying a huge pile of paper before her, and did not see anything in front of her. Noticing this ridiculous picture, Baek Yusol offered to help and took most of the paper letters. After he brought the paper to the right place, where it was a complete mess, Altalisai thanked him, because otherwise the professor would have yelled at her. When he noticed the formula, he was surprised. Altalisai told him that Professor Maisin was developing this formula in collaboration with other teachers. Baek Yusol mentioned that this is a technique for convergent random sequences, and it became the first formula of magic, alchemy, and engineering in the episode of Professor Mason's Blackening. Demons help her complete the formula, and the difference in technique leads to terrible consequences. But with Altalisai's appearance, everything changes quickly. What if she solves this problem before the dark people enter the plot? Baek Yusol thinks so. He approached Altalisa, to which she, being the scared type, was expectedly frightened and offered him coffee. When she refused, he asked her if she was annoyed that Professor Mazen was constantly bothering her. She wondered why he was asking her that. After a short pause, Baek Yusol said he could offer her an easy plan to repay the professor, according to his merits. But she's just an assistant. How can she afford it, and if she gets fired, she'll have to live on the street, said Elliot Leese. Then he offered the option of becoming an alchemist, better than Professor Maisin, so that no one could despise her, since Altalisa was already tired of being satisfied with dirty work in a dusty closet, like Maisin was pushing on her. She agreed. She dreams of becoming an alchemist and creating many inventions, and she has the talent to make her dream come true. So Altalisa will one day become the most brilliant alchemist of this generation, and invent countless items and innovations. Of course, until now, reality has not allowed her to do so, so she had to put her dream on the back burner. but Baek Yusul will turn it into reality. After the first exam week, Baek Yusul regularly visited Al-Talisai. They always spent their time actively and talked about new innovations together, which greatly lifted the girls' spirits. Baek Yusul was also pleased, because her research and inventions are gaining momentum, but she still struggles with calculating formulas, so it will not be easy for the young genius to find the right answer, until Mazentran finds the formula. While he was thinking, Flame noticed him walking down the hall, and came over to tell him that he was going to bump into someone. Flame called him old. She began to scrutinize him more, which annoyed Baek Yusul still. He decided to ask her about her friend Jackie, thinking that the guy wanted to meet her. She cringed and said it was illegal, but Baek Yusul hadn't finished speaking yet, and asked to hear the rest. If Jackie were under the influence of a demon, she would be extremely unstable, so he asked Flame to look after her. Not understanding the boy's strange request, she agreed to go hunting this weekend anyway. As the season had just opened, Baek Yusul already knew where they would go to, the location where the 4th episode of Marta Cemetery would begin, and where all the main characters would go. The battle will be great, and a 5th-ranked necromancer, Baek Yusul, will appear. He did not want to participate, but a secret reward would help him immensely with the familiars, so he went to the 2nd main tower, found instructor Lee Han-Wael, and filled out an application for a hunting pass. After reviewing Baek Yusul's application, Lee Han-Wael realized that fencing, or the honor code, is challenging to learn at the academy. Musin's application for time off was on the table, so he decided to find out more. He then said that many students took time off to go hunting, to which the professor agreed that they were going hunting to score more points, just as Baek Yusul thought. Even though Mayasong and he Won Riang had high grades, they persisted. The teacher said that Mayasong actually asked to go home. Surprised by this, he realized that they would not be able to deal with the necromancer without Mayasong. I don't know what got into my Yusin, because he would never leave without a good reason. But this team can't handle a 5th-level necromancer. What should Baek Yusin do without evidence? He will not be able to request support or pass on information because of narrative rights. He has no other choice. He can't let them be destroyed, so he has to solve everything himself. A few days later, at the mart of his cemetery, the students were already easily destroying rather weak monsters. One of them was sophomore Doc Cho Kwan, who destroyed a harbinger fish with a 2nd level of danger. With a single blow later, a sophomore Kasef Derek came to him and started scolding him for disobeying an order, to which Doc only joked. Next to them stood Azel and sophomore Bondian, who said that Kasef's actions were useless because Doc was always so hot-tempered. Van turned to Isabel and told her she didn't have to worry about them, but she was embarrassed and silent looking at them. Isabel thought she went with them only because their club had a vacancy, and they seemed good people. He was about to leave when a burst of light and noise from strong magical spells appeared behind Hazel. When they asked what the noise was, they realized someone had enthusiastically joined the battle near them, so they decided to say hello, at least because it would not be good if their hunting zones overlap with someone else's. Hung Beong and Flame stood opposite, looking at each other with unfriendly intentions. Isel watched the whole situation and wondered what was going on. Upon a cursory inspection of the neighborhood, a large harbinger fish was lying on the ground. It was a 3rd-level fish that was very difficult to find. They were probably arguing about who would get the most points, and if you interfered there would be many problems besides. Hazel has no desire to cross paths with the younger sister of the enemy, who killed her father before. She could decide that leaving as soon as possible was the best solution. The leader of her group, Kasif, decided to reconcile the girls, believing that he was older than them and had authority among the younger ones. He approached and asked them to explain the situation, to which the girls rudely pushed him away. At the same time, this made him angry and he asked for more respect, to which Hong Bian said that if he was older, he should behave accordingly. Their heated argument was abruptly interrupted by some unknown pressure, and a strange sensation that gripped their bodies, as dozens of pure white hand remains began to pierce the ground and reach out into the world. It was the strongest and most terrifying magic of the earth necromancy. At this time Baek Yusul was destroying monsters, and thinking that he also wanted to use magic, which was why there was a flicker. Of all things, He knew something about this event and its weaknesses, so he moved in a specific direction to find what he needed. He didn't have the strong skills or incredible power to destroy an army of skeletons like Ma Yusong, so Baek Yusol has only one survival option, acting as only players can. He approached the grave of the general, who had commanded hundreds of skeletons, and immediately began to crawl out of his resting place. There are only 3 such half-boss generals in this episode, and with the guy's current level of ability, it's just not possible for him to fight him. As usual, watching the monster crawl out or transform is a cliché, but this waste of time does not bring you closer to victory. So without hesitation he defeated the general with a single blow, and turned his head into a staff with which to control the skeletons. Since Baek Yusol can now control the skeleton army, you can join the group and complete the episode. While Baek Yusol was dealing with the skeleton general, a group of students were surrounded by 100 skeletons, which they could barely handle. Flame had forgotten that she would be a necromancer in this episode, but something was wrong. She looked at Azel, but Musin wasn't there. They need to counter the 5th level necromancer with such a team, so Rian has already requested the Academy's support, which will arrive in 3 hours. Professor Stella will help them if they hold out for a while, and even if they can't fight the necromancer, they will be able to escape. Hung Bian said there was no time to talk because it was a cemetery, and the longer they waited, the more skeletons would appear, so they had to retreat to the camp. But Jackie could not cope with the onslaught of skeletons, and could no longer defend herself. And when the skeletons had almost reached her, Azel suddenly shattered the skeleton with a strong ice attack. Azel quickly realized that it was a necromancer, and that he had prepared himself thoroughly. She thought it was highly likely that he had used the mana vessel technique. The necromancer can inject and store his mana. With the mana vessel technique, necromancers have their own mana limits, and if they just summon monsters, they would run out of mana after 10 skeletons. Since it was almost impossible to take over such a large territory, it had all been planned long ago, so the group guessed it was a necromancer's plan to turn them into skeleton mages and replenish his army with mighty warriors. Kasif decided that since he was in charge, he needed to use strong magic to end everything. But his plan was destroyed by a skeleton that grabbed his leg. Dr. Khan noticed that his friend was in danger, and immediately rushed to him, where he quickly managed to fight off the skeleton. However, it was too late and Kasef did not have time to finish the spell, so they were hit by a strong magical bounce. Yes, the situation was not the best. And then there is the magical bounce that can cover everyone with its explosion, so you need to withstand it. Most of the students could no longer fight, and fell down from exhaustion. Flame was also on her last legs. Flame's mana was almost gone and her skeletons were running out. She had no way out. The skeleton had already come too close, and was about to destroy the girl, but before it could touch her, it stopped abruptly. All the skeletons stopped and froze, and behind the crowd of skeletons stood someone with a familiar face. It was Baek Yusol holding a rod with a general's head on the end. But how could he defeat him? Flame thought, the general is much stronger and more potent than ordinary skeletons, and is guarded by the elite. Baek Yusol was able to defeat him alone. Everyone was saved from death thanks to him, and the sophomores thanked him for his bravery. But Azel was curious how he got the general's head, and he joked that he just pulled it out of a pile of bones. So you need to devise a plan of action quickly, because when the necromancer realizes he cannot use the generals, he will begin to control the skeletons directly. Then the sophomores asked him if he had a plan, and he said that on the way here, he had seen a necromancer near the camp, so they could not escape the encirclement. Therefore they have only one option to destroy the necromancer, because although they have strong magic, they are physically almost nothing. The students objected to the fact that he was surrounded by many skeletons. Still, Baek Yusol was sure that the mage was already exhausted, and if he hadn't attacked now, they would never have escaped. At the moment, the necromancer's guard includes 1 general, 6 elite skeletons and 50 ordinary ones, and the more time passes the more of them there will be. But how do you convince others of this? Then Hong Bian and Flame helped him by agreeing to his plan, especially since the necromancer didn't expect an attack. Now the sophomores looked at each other, and realized there was no other way out, so they had to attack the necromancer. Now at this time the 5th ranked necromancer of the Dark Tower, Sebek, was near the camp and was looking forward to the students' defeat. He reflected on how lucky he was to have met Stella's students. When they became part of his army, the Demon Alliance would finally equal him. After collecting about 7 years of mana and mana vessels, he reached an army of 700 skeletons. Now no one will mock him, however. Something abruptly caught his attention. One of the generals had been destroyed by someone, which greatly confused the necromancer. Not only did he threaten Cybek's plans, but he also looked around and noticed a giant ice arrow flying at him at great speed, having managed to react to the attack by blocking it with a wall of bones created by a 4th-ranked magic. He noticed it had cracked, but the students didn't waste a minute, so a giant fireball flew at the necromancer, burning everything in its path. Although he could fight back again, he let his guard down, never thinking that the students were attacking him. They were still the Stella Academy, so one shouldn't underestimate them, the necromancer thought, and began to prepare for the defense. Initially, the necromancer did not plan to use this. Still, it would be dangerous to confront in a direct fight, so it is worth calling elite warriors. He quickly cast a spell, and within seconds, a strong army of skeletons gathered around him, having overdone it a bit with the skeleton summoning spell. His organs were injured, but that should be enough, the necromancer thought, and just when he thought he could relax, Baek Yusol jumped behind him using the flicker. He was shocked that Baek Yusol had appeared so quickly, because he had been closely watching all the students through the skeleton's eyes. In addition, the boy had the head of one of the necromancer's generals on his head, but Baek Yusol did not hesitate to throw it to the ground and break it. This act caused the necromancer a great deal of damage, so Baek Yusol saw the underestimated power of Stella's academy. Meanwhile, the guy realized that everything was not going according to plan, because the sophomores were supposed to deal with the generals and come to his aid. However, because of the additional elite warriors, they are not finished yet, and he will have to fight alone as the weakest of the group. Looking at the necromancer again, he realized that he had overdone his summoning and had suffered internal injuries, so Baek Yusol had a chance. Hong, beyond fighting off the skeletons, knew how to destroy them as quickly as possible and unite with Baek Yusol, but she was distracted. Arshwin reported that Baek Yusol was left alone with the necromancer, knowing that it would be an unequal fight. Because of the high difference in ranks, she could not leave the fight. Meanwhile, in Bakusal, a prison of pure white bones rose from the ground, almost fraudulently created in just a second. The only way to deal with it is to react as quickly as possible and get out, so the guy took advantage of the flicker and jumped back, jumping again as close as possible to the necromancer. Baek Yusol was about to attack, when the latter immediately defended himself with a wall of bones. However, Baek Yusol foresaw this, and brought many cola potions that dissolve bones very effectively, thus destroying Sabahek's barrier. The necromancer was enraged by this, called the boy a miserable rat, and attacked him with a spell of bone spears. Bekus all wanted to take advantage of the enemy's irritation, and jumped behind him to deliver the decisive blow. At that moment, Sabahek turned his head to him and smiled, because he had hidden one of the spears in the ground behind him, which managed to wound the boy in the shoulder. The necromancer, rejoicing that he had caught Bekusal, praised himself and told him that he had wounded him badly, and would make a good warrior in his army. Now Baek Yusol realizes that although the necromancer is weak, he is of the 5th rank, and although he is a high-ranked enemy, he is still weak. One more jump and he's defeated. But he can't use his mind because of the pain, so he can't stop the flicker. So he needs to increase the distance. So taking advantage of the necromancer's arrogance, he crawled a little further like a rat to make his plan work. The distance between them was 15 meters. At this distance, Baek Yusol would not have to use the flicker interrupt. Seeing the glimmer of hope, Baek Yusol moved with the help of flicker, and in a split second, he was standing in front of the necromancer, and immediately struck the final blow. Immediately the skeletons began to crumble, and almost nothing remained except a cloud of ash floating in the air. The students were happy because Baek Yusol was able to cope and destroy the necromancer on his own, and they were glad they were able to escape and survive. Meanwhile, Baek Yusol, hearing fragments of his friend's phrases, fell over the necromancer's body, and lost consciousness from his wounds and fatigue. After the incident, the magical knights accompanied the students from the scene to Stella Academy. Lee Han-wol, who had just returned, commented to Baek Yusol, that he had promised to train in a place with clean air, but he didn't think it would be a cemetery. Baek Yusol apologized, but still, according to the academy, he will be deducted points because there are no exceptions. However, it is remarkable that he went to save his comrades, without thinking about breaking the rules, and Baek Yusol deserves a reward and points. So the professor turned and left, and Baek Yusol remembered that he had been told that his legs needed a few days to recover, so he needed to rest. At that moment Azel approached him and thanked him for today, and Baek Yusol asked her to take him out to dinner sometime. As he was about to leave, Azel interrupted him and asked if she could do the same, if she tried or if she would reach the same heights as him. It was a bad idea on the guy's part because in the original, she didn't ask such questions because he interfered. Hazel faced a challenge and could not overcome. After thinking about it, he replied that she didn't need to ask him. She had already achieved remarkable results that others considered unattainable. Confused, the girl asked him how he knew this, and he replied briefly and clearly that he had been watching her. The girl blushed and Baek Yusol realized what he had said. He quickly left Acehel, because it sounded like he was some kind of perverted stalker. However, Acehel is happy about it, because no one is interested in the life of a trader's daughter. He said that he was watching her, so these words warmed her heart. The next day, all those involved in the incident were gathered to be rewarded, and Baek Yusol was surprised that many nobles and high-ranking mages had come. But anyway, he looked at Hong Bian, who was beaming with joy, when she noticed that Baek Yusol was looking at her, and she was a little embarrassed. In the end, Li Hanwal came to the podium, and said that 12 students, who fought with a representative of the Dark People, would be awarded today. The principal will hand out these awards at this moment. At that point, he will rise to the podium and look at all the brave students. Baek Yusol saw Elton for the first time, so he was surprised that he would personally award the guy. He remembered that he was 300 years old and always smiled pleasantly. Yet he was the most potent magic warrior with the fighter title. Elton approached each student in turn and rewarded them with sincere words of support and wishes for the future. It was Baek Yusol's turn, so the director approached him. The boy became very nervous but did not show it. He could feel his gaze on him, pressing him hard. That's what a 9th-ranked mage is like. The boy thought the director smiled sincerely and said, Baek Yusol was as diligent as ever. Still the boy did not understand his meaning, so the ceremony ended. So Baek Yusol received 5 million credits as a reward, and now he doesn't have to worry about money for a while. He was also given vessels of mana that can be counted as a reward for destroying the necromancer, which can be counted as his heart. Still not easy for Baek Yusol. Still soon, Al-Talisai will develop a subspace, and then it will be easier for him to carry things around. Now it was time for rewards from the system, which again gave him a choice. He decided that now, the most important thing was to convert everything into experience. He realized how weak he was in this battle. Even careful training is useless, so he should use his knowledge to advance further. The experience conversion, he chose improved the flicker skill, and allowed it to be used up to 3 times continuously. Meanwhile, Isel was in a meditation class on the journey into the abyss, where she diligently followed the professor's instructions. But Isel accidentally fell asleep, and the professor, who was in the form of a butterfly, flew up and told her that magic was forbidden during meditation. She looked up and couldn't believe her eyes. She had accidentally created an ice boulder above her, even though she hadn't used the technique. She glanced at the other students, but they didn't notice anything. Even though it was first-rank magic, they should have felt the mana flow anyway. Then Azel thought that if this was the effect of meditation, it meant that Baek Yusolu had predicted everything. After the meditation lesson, thanks to the reward, she could now enjoy a bun with red bean paste, so she was pleased about it. Having only had 1 bite of the bun, she was distracted by Prince Jeremy, who took an interest in her and asked her if she had joined any clubs. She wasn't interested in any clubs, so she wasn't in any clubs, and the prince offered her a place in his club. Hazel asked what the conditions were, and Jeremy said there were no conditions. He just liked her so much that he wanted her in his ranks. However, Azel kept quiet because she knew it was a lie, and he just wanted to get her and turn her into his trophy. Thinking that the girl didn't believe him, He leaned over to her and said there were no conditions, only that she would join his group and stay close to him. It was hard to say no to him because she understood who he was. The kingdom of Adalbert was at war with him and his empire, so under his influence her life would improve. She will no longer have to enjoy a bun, nor will she have to endure the humiliation of being the daughter of a traitor. But she knows it's not worth it. The moment Izel opened her mouth to say something, her eyes were empty and she felt a blow to her cheek that did not immediately begin to hurt. Flame started yelling at Izel for flirting with men again, even after she confessed her feelings. However, before Izel could speak, Flame grabbed her wrist and forced her to go away to talk to her. As Flame ran away, she said that Izel should thank her, because if she had refused Jeremy for no reason, he would have forced himself on her anyway. Still, after apologizing for the slap, Flame turned and left, leaving Hazel, who had absolutely no idea what was happening. Flame wondered if she had done the right thing, because if Hazel had joined Jeremy's circle, Jeremy's novel would have crushed her spirit. She didn't want to disrupt the story, but looking at Beck Ussel's actions, she thought she had done the right thing, and she was worried that Jeremy hadn't realized she was making it up. Jeremy was sitting in his apartment drinking tea, thinking about Flame and how interesting she was. Of course, he realized that everything she said to get Hazel out of his clutches was a lie, and he thought it was even cute. So she's more interesting than Hazel. So Jeremy promised that he would get Flame at any cost. A very important exam was to begin in a few days, so Lee Hanwal gathered the students there and told them what the task was. Unlike before, when students had only encountered monsters of the first and second levels of danger, the target of this battle was monsters of the third level. This is a strategy task, so by dividing into teams, you need to analyze all the information about the monster and tactically destroy it. Therefore, since it is necessary to defeat a medium-level monster, students will be given 4 days to prepare. After learning about the monsters, you need to choose the most suitable one for your team. This time, the SNA classes will be combined. So Lee Hanwell asked to form teams of up to 6 people and hand in the lists. And Hazel stood there thinking she hated group activities. No one approached her to recruit her to the team, opposite Hong Bian, who was surrounded by many students who asked to join them. Her circle was once so large too, before the Adalabites destroyed her family, although they were once equal in the Grand Duchy of Malf with the ice element, and the Kingdom of Adalabed with the fire element at that time. These two families held each other back, dividing the world of magic into two. Then 2 geniuses, Hanbian and Hazel, were born, and she thought she was chosen. But in her current state, she is not sure she can resist the Adalabites. Unexpectedly, someone approached her. It was Beck Usol, who immediately asked if she was alone, and she shyly said yes. Then, with a sincere smile and a pleasant tone, he invited Hazel to form a team with him. Although Hung Byong was surrounded by many students, she noticed that Beck Usol came up and invited Hazel to join the team. There are no restrictions on the minimum number of participants, so Beck used all. Surprised the girl by offering to create a team of the 2 of them, and even get a bonus. It would be difficult to defeat the third-level monster by himself, so Beck Usol asked her again with a smile if she agreed. After pausing and thinking, she agreed because she had no one to cooperate with. Beck Usol went to hand in the list. At this point, Hongbyun quickly approached Hazel and stood before her, with obviously unfriendly intentions. Hazel asked what she wanted and told her to behave. If a pig like her was lucky, the princess immediately turned around and walked in the other direction, to not see Hazel, who had just been humiliated for almost nothing. Although it was very unpleasant for Hazel to hear this about herself, she realized that it was not about her abilities, but about Beck Usel. Meanwhile, Hongbyong thought she would never lose to a loser and a commoner, and that even a team of her sticking points would be enough. However, attracting a knight, considered the best of the best, is most advantageous, so the princess approached Mayusin. Mayusin approached him and greeted her in his usual manner. Still, Hong Byong immediately asked if he had a team, and he replied that he wanted to be alone. Then she proposed to form a team, which Mayusin refused. But she had an argument that Bak Yusol and Isol would be together. The princess didn't think they would go for a medium-level monster, rather than a medium-large special monster, so she asked him again if he agreed, and Ma Yusin smiled and said yes, because he had wanted to compete with Bak Yusol for a long time. Having agreed with Ma Yusin, the princess looked at her rivals, and thought that she would surpass them this time. For days later, Professor Lee Havel gathered the students in the test hall and announced the start of the practical exam for ANS classes. Flame stood aside and waited for her turn. First, she thought she would defeat the monster with the opposite attribute, but to get more points she decided to be alone. On average, it takes 5 first-class mages to defeat an average monster. If you add attribute compatibility, you can handle a higher-level monster. However, Flame is a mage of the attribute of light, and this attribute does not combine with the others, so she decided to take the exam herself. Flame hoped that Azel would be okay, because she failed to form a team in the novel, and received the lowest grade. She even wanted to invite Azel to her place, but if Bekasal was with her, everything would turn out as well as possible. After the 16th group finished the test, it was the turn of the 17th group, which had only one flame. When she heard that it was time to leave, she moved from her seat and walked past Beck, Yusol and Isol without even looking in their direction. However, Flame forgot to tie her shoelaces, stumbled and began to fall, when Beck Yusol ran up behind her, and managed to save her from the inevitable fall. After thanking Beck Yusol, she hurried up and realized that Jackie always tied her shoes, and it would be difficult for her to go out on the field alone. So when the students went to the battlefield, they were surprised that such a fragile girl like her could destroy the monster on her own. Opposite her stood a large boar, and it did not have my attributes, so there was no point in hitting it with the opposite. No one waited and the exam began. So a gigantic bear carcass was chasing the poor girl. No one believed her, but Flame began to use the spell. Flowers swung in the wind without hesitation. This spell stopped the giant monster and gave Flame time to prepare an already attacking spell. So as soon as the boar got out of the trap, he immediately rushed to Flame, but he didn't have time to get there, because she had attacked and destroyed him. The body of the giant bear fell with a roar, right in front of Flame's feet, which meant that she had passed the test. All the students were shocked by this because some of them, even as a group of 5, could not defeat the mid-level monster. On her way to the stands, she heard that the next group would be the 31st, and was very surprised that it was Mayusin and Hongbyong. Standing aside, Flame wondered why Hongbyong was with Mayusin, since the two never met in the novel. As expected from a princess, she chose a relatively rare monster of medium danger level. The fishman Hongbyong and Ma Yuzin's attributes are fire, earth and lightning, and the fishman is a monster of the water element, so he is the exact opposite of their attributes. After assessing the situation, Flame realized that if they defeated such a monster in 2, giving up the natural advantage, they would get maximum marks. It was time to start the battle, and the monster immediately screamed a terrible scream. It was about to attack, but it took off. However, Hongbyong and Mayasong were in no hurry to attack the monster, and everyone was surprised to see the swordsman standing behind the magician. However, Mayasong jumped up using a power jump, leaving only a dust cloud on the floor that was no longer under him. The sophomores were surprised by the power jump, but he couldn't get to the fishman, because a power jump can only be done from the surface. So Mayasong used the earth's magic to raise a small platform for himself, and Hongbyong used a punch to give momentum to this platform. Ma Yusong used his giant kick technique to easily bring the flying monster to the ground. Then, using the earth's magic, he raised large stone slabs from the ground and blocked the fishman in them. This was not enough, and the monster was able to escape, but it was too late, because the princess had finished preparing a powerful spell, thinking that this was not enough for the monster. However, it was already clear that he was unhappy about the princess's attack, as Musin attacked him with lightning. After such strong attacks, the monster quickly burned to ashes and only a handful of ash remained. Although all the students were delighted with them, Hongbyong wanted Beck Yusol's recognition. He thought he would not surpass her result. Beck Yusol had already entered the battlefield with Azel and asked to summon 5 monsters. This surprised all the students, because 5 could not defeat even one monster, and here there were 5 at once. The 5 monsters summoned were a Himeridan frog, a sand grizzly black bull, a falcon, a Kylan slime Nami, and a supersensitive Baek. Hong Byung asked if Ma Yuzin understood anything, but he was curious about Baek Yusol's plans. Lee Hanwal asked who had made the monster selection, and Baek Yusol replied without hesitation that it was him. The professor said that since Baek Usol was a knight, he could get points even in such an extreme situation, and he thought such a strategy was impossible for the bishop. Baek Usol disagreed and argued that this strategy was designed for the bishop. Although the professor was surprised by these words, he understood what the boy meant and asked them to start a fight. The guy asked if Azel was ready, and she said that she had been for a long time, so Baek Yusol asked her to trust him. At that moment the girl remembered their dialogue. During another night's training session, Azel wondered why he chose her. With his abilities he could have hired anyone with better talent, although no one can match the power of Hong Byung's flame control spells. Ma Yuzin is generally the strongest of the freshmen. All of them would have been suitable for Baek Yusol, but he decided that it was better to form a team with Azel, and that was that. To be honest, Azel still didn't understand what Baek Yusol had in mind, but there must be a reason why he chose her, and in that case, she would justify his choice. So motivated, Azel began concentrating on using an intense high-ranking spell. The students realized that this was an etheric resonance. This phenomenon manifests itself only when a magician of the 6th rank or higher fully enters his consciousness. A countercurrent phenomenon can occur at their maximum concentration, releasing all their mana. Baek Yusol looked at her and thought that she really deserved the title of Queen of Winter. It was time to start planning a battle for 2 against 5 monsters. So without hesitation the boy immediately used the flicker and got as close as possible to the Himaraden frog. Thus, after taking the Himaraden out of the fight for a while, the next one was a sand-grizzled black bull standing nearby. But the bull was not going to attack Baek Yusol. For some reason he was more interested in the Himaraden. So he stood and looked at the frog's horn red from the blow. Everything is going according to Baek Yusol's plan, because the method of fighting the 5 monsters is to create a situation in which they destroy each other. Pitting your enemies against each other is called the strategy of the borrowed knife, when you don't need to waste your own strength, but take someone else's knife. Once upon a time, the game veterans considered how to defeat many monsters in a small group, and after many attempts, found a way to use the monster's features against them. First you need to attack the Highlander, after which its horn will turn red, which will cause instinctive aggression in the black bull. An excited black bull releases sand from its body, scattering it everywhere. When the sand falls on the slime Nami, it starts creating a lot of water to keep it from drying out. Then the Caden falcon, sensing moisture, will begin to scream loudly at the level of the 7th octave, if not higher, and finally, it will provoke the hypersensitive bat with its sensitive hearing, after which it will attack the Caden. The teachers were surprised that the monsters didn't get along, and praised the boy for understanding the characteristics of the monsters he chose. But what really impressed them was Asel's concentration. Even in the midst of this chaos, she was focused and her mana was stable. It is immediately apparent that ICL sincerely trusts herself and her protection to her knight, Baek Yusol, who has been tirelessly defending her from the monster's chaotic attacks. Looking at Baek Yusol, Ma Yuzin asked Princess Hongbyong if she thought Baek Yusol looked like the perfect knight to protect his princess. Finally Yusol opened her blue eyes and grabbed her stick. The water on the ground froze and a giant flower grew high in the sky. Eventually the ice would be broken, and all their attention would be focused on Azel, because she had just made a high-profile attack. However, before that happened, the shiny and beautiful flower shattered into pieces, turning into a sharp weapon that fell in all directions. This did not help destroy the monsters, so all the professors thought that although the team failed, they would already have high marks for this attempt. When they were about to make this decision, Hazel pulled the opposite one into the air, and the cluster of blue light that served as the petals of the crystal flower still remained. Everyone thought it was part of an ice flower that blossomed with the ice and turned into leaves. Still, her specialty was magic that combined ice and lightning simultaneously. Her magic was close to art. It was a destructive art, aimed at destroying enemies whose beauty was admired by everyone. Before, she didn't believe she could use the 2 attributes, but Baek Yusol said he felt in her, and let her believe in his belief in her. Until now she had nothing, no faith in her purpose, and no one to support her and recognize her path. But everything has changed, and now, she has her own light that illuminates the road in front of her, so she doesn't have to wander in the dark. So after the assessment of the 32nd team's abilities, Azel stood in the arena with a sweet smile on her face. The next day the results were tallied and posted for review, and Mayu, Song and Hong Byong confirmed that they had taken second place. So the princess accepted defeat, even after they defeated a mid-level monster that even had the opposite attribute. Then the princess thought, what if her knight was Baek Yusol? She could also show such potent magic. If there were a perfect knight in this world, it would be logical for him to serve Hung Byong, who would become the ideal queen. The princess thought, she would probably lie to herself if she said she had accepted, so she decided to find out more about Baek Yusol. When she decided to leave, she noticed Saerin Orkan, so the princess quickly passed, because she thought she had come to gloat over her defeat of such a team. Saerin looked at the girl's back and said she hadn't learned anything. At this time Flame was sitting in the library writing something. Still, she was worried that Azel had mastered the crystal flower so early. This spell became her signature. As soon as she believed in herself in the future, after passing all the tests in the original, Azel was about to fall. But she showed a crystal flower, probably thanks to Baek Yusol. In the original plot of Ma's novel, Yuzin and Azel confess their feelings to each other, while the world around them collapses. But what if there's another storyline that Flame doesn't know about, where the side character Baek Yuzin loves Azel and in the moment of disaster wants to regress, instead of Ma Yuzin? This regression allows you to create a world in which his beloved survive, even if she does not remember for him. Whether Baek Yusol will be satisfied with the result. Love was so fueled that he decided to turn back time, at the cost of his existence in the world. I wonder what Flame thought about it. Since Baek Yusol completed the 5th episode, he could have benefited from an additional reward from the system. The guy realized that he had already strengthened his skills enough, so preparing for the next episode was better. So he did not hesitate to request an item called Ephanul's Key, and the system thought about it, but gave him the item. Although this item is not of the level of an ancient relic, it is still a scarce item available only to the strongest players. This key gives access to the place where the deities exist, but you need to leave the academy to use it. However, after the incident with the necromancer, it became difficult to get time off. So I needed to join a club to get permission to leave the academy. The next day at one of the lectures, Baek Yusol successfully wrote an essay, and decided to go look for a club for himself. He stood and looked at the bulletin board, choosing a club that would suit him. Not everyone is given permission to leave the academy, so you need to think carefully. Azel was standing next to Baek Yusol, so he asked her if she hadn't joined a club yet, and she replied that it was strange. He was sure many clubs would like to have her, but she didn't think so because of her status. After the practical exam, people's opinions of Azel changed significantly. She should understand this better than anyone else, but must choose carefully. Suddenly, as if on purpose, Mayasin crept up on them as quietly as possible, put his hand on Baek Yusol's shoulder and greeted them. He liked their performance at the exam, and also heard that Baek Yusol led the recent battle with the necromancer, which made him admire him. Leaning closer, and looking at him with a look that pierced his soul's core, Ma Yusin said that he knew that Baek Yusol thought differently from others. Baek Yusol did not hesitate to say that he was a commoner, so he had to try harder than others. To which Ma Yusin replied that he was having a better time than him. I had to ask Ma Yusin what he does on weekends, and he replied that he prepares his homework, which surprised not only Baek Yusol, but also Azel. Baek Yusol pointed out that Ma Yusin is also studying and training, but he doesn't look like a nerd. He replied that he had only recently started doing all this, but he was supposed to start working hard later. What was the reason Baek Yusol thought, and then Azel realized it was the practice. Ma Yusin agreed because if it wasn't for Azel, who for some reason called her lady, which made her angry that she didn't show up, he would have lost to He Won Ryung. In the original plot, Mayasong and Flame were supposed to easily defeat He Won Ryung. However, due to the Baek Yusol, Flame was delayed and had to face an opponent himself. So it turns out he also changed early. It was for the best at this rate. They will try harder, and unlike Baek Yusol, their progress positively impacts the happy ending. Realizing that Baek Yusul had not yet joined any club, Mason invited him to his club. He said he would consider it if he was satisfied with the conditions. So as expected, Mason asked him what conditions he wanted, and Baek Yusul began to list several. The main one being permission to be active outside the academy. Azel was surprised by such demands, but the hero understood this and just joked. Mason accepted these words, and offered to create such a group for him, even with a condition for special outings. Bak Yusuf asked what the benefit was for Musin, and he replied that it was simple because Bak Yusuf was special. The guy just mentioned that one of Musin's main problems was his loneliness, so he agreed to it and was so excited. Also, Baek Yusul decided to bring Azel with him because in the original, they were inseparable, so now she can fix Ma Yusin's psyche. Baek Yusul had an idea, so they filled out a club registration form and called their group the Tasty Places Club. Their goal was to research restaurants. Ezel asked if this would work, because to get a seal that allows the activity, a teacher leader must blow at least 4 of them. This was not a problem for Musin, because he would deal with the participants in seals, but the teacher would be a challenge. This surprised Baek Yusul, because Mayusin could even get special permission to take time off, to which he replied that they were just garbage. So Mayusin went to get the seal, and Baek Yusul thought that not everyone could give a seal for a special activity, so it must be someone at the top of the academy. In the first central tower, Stella, the academy's deputy director, was sitting in her office when the door opened, and someone quickly entered. The deputy director was amazed to see Mayu Song, and said he hadn't seen his grandfather for a long time.